The people that have gone out there against the mainstream media and said, you're going to call us racist, you're going to call us potential Timothy McVeighs, fuck you. War.
Quite sure he's right. An obsessionally neurotic. Pretty dangerous, in fact.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
Do you mean you doubt your powers to convince him?
Say it! Say it!
All right, I'll say it.
Worse than that. What I'm afraid of is his power to convince me.
We're talking about putting a manifestly irresponsible man on national television.
Sweetheart, be reasonable.
War.
This is the end game.
All right, everybody. It is Friday, May 9th, 2025, the 110th day of the Golden Age. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. Hope you're all having a good Friday out there. I think Rumble is working now. Rumble was down. Now Rumble seems to be back up. If you are watching on Rumble and it goes down again, the way to fortify yourself in that instance is to go over to YouTube and find the I'm Your Moderator channel over there and give that a follow. That would be a big help to me regardless, but that's the backup plan. Or actually, it's also on Substack, and you can, of course, go watch it there. I think maybe it's even streaming to Getter and Telegram. Not too many people watching those places, but some do. And we have to think about them every now and then too. Okay, so lots of big stuff happening. I'm going to try to blaze through a lot of the stuff that's happened in the last 2 days and then get to the International Crisis Group report. Been saying it all week. I think I'm going to really do it today. We're going to try. We're going to give it the old college try. Let us start with the victory parade in Russia. This is Reuters from yesterday. Friends of Steel, Xi and Putin pledged to stand together against United States. Okay, well, that's very threatening. Chinese President Xi Jinping told Russia's Vladimir Putin on Thursday their two countries should be friends of steel as they pledge to raise cooperation to a new level and decisively counter the influence of the United States. At talks in the Kremlin, the two leaders cast themselves as defenders of a new world order no longer dominated by the United States. In a lengthy joint statement, they said they would deepen relations in all areas, including military ties, and strengthen coordination in order to decisively counter Washington's course of dual containment of Russia and China. Now, not sure that's Donald Trump's course. It has traditionally been the course for the United States over these many decades, but most of that has been driven by the neoconservative project, which is the same as the global regime project. It's the same as the neoliberal project, and packed within all of that are all the other various ways to break down collectivism and all the forms it has taken, most particularly over the last 100 years. The two countries said the Ukraine conflict could only be settled by removing its root causes, a phrase that Russia has frequently used when arguing that it was forced to go to war to prevent the prospect of Ukraine joining NATO. Ukraine and its Western allies say that was a false pretext for what they call an imperial-style invasion. And you'll notice that Trump generally aligns with the framing proposed here by Russia and China and does not say that Putin invaded. At least he does not go to the lengths he has. I will not say that he's never said that, of course. Trump describes a lot of things in a lot of ways, but he recognizes the conditions present in Ukraine prior to the quote unquote invasion. She is the most powerful of more than 24 foreign leaders who are visiting Moscow this week to mark Thursday's 80th anniversary of the end of World War II, a celebration of huge significance for Putin. And Trump declared that yesterday would be the American celebration of victory in World War II. So Russia's is May 9th, and now apparently ours is May 8th. Xi's participation and the joint statement aligning China with Russia's view of the conflict provide Putin with an important boost as Russia comes under pressure from the United States to end the war. And skipping down, in another implied reference to the U.S., she said Russia and China would work together to counter unilateralism and bullying. And this is some stuff that we have talked about now for years with the emergence of the multipolar world order. That is, at this point, inevitable. It already exists. A lot of the things that we are told to be worried about by the media, those things have already happened. And they want to prep us and kind of condition us to have a certain reaction once we realize that those things happen, or to do everything we can to stand against the public acceptance of the way things actually are right now, but they certainly are that way. So we mentioned on Wednesday that Nicolas Maduro was in Russia, and Lukashenko, of course, was in Russia. She's in Russia. Lula da Silva from Brazil went to Russia. I mean, he's Brazil's Joe Biden, so who knows how much that matters. Robert Fico from Slovakia, the man who they had attempted to assassinate. Then they threatened him that he could not and should not go to Russia. He did that anyway. There's a story yesterday about how his plane had to be diverted and rerouted because airspace had been closed to him so that he couldn't travel directly to Russia. Who knows what to make of that? Alexander Vučić of Serbia also attended. Those were the two European leaders. Many of the leaders of the stands attended. Miguel Diaz-Canel of Cuba, Laos, Myanmar, their leaders all attended. Many African leaders, including Traore from Burkina Faso, attended. So these are a lot of the countries that have kicked the global regime out over the years, the last few years. They're the ones who stand against the global regime generally. Many of the BRICS nations are there. I guess India was supposed to attend, but their delegation canceled at the last minute because of the war or something that's happening between India and Pakistan. And we talked about that a bit the other day. Xi and Putin, here's some video of Xi and Putin hanging out at the parade. Looking like they're having a heck of a time together. Lots of laughs and smiles. Translators seem to be having a nice time. Those are our two greatest adversaries. It's not Macron and Ursula von der Leyen and the people in Israel trying to cause war all over the Middle East. It's not those people. It's those guys right there. How could they? How can they just sit there together, laughing and smiling as if everything's going to be okay? This was some of Russia's parade, and we'll see. In 5 weeks, Trump has said we're having a parade. Maybe it'll be a lot like this. Maybe that'll be a great thing.
праздником, с Днем Великой Победы.
So he says, congratulations on the great victory day. That's the most Russian thing that's ever happened. I mean, you look at that for 2 seconds, you're like, oh, that's got to be Russia. Turns out, yeah, it is. I mean, maybe that's all propaganda. Maybe it's all bullshit. Who knows? I guess we'll see in a month what the response is. There was I think it was on CNN the other day. Maybe it was Scott Jennings. You know, they always post Scott Jennings highlights every day as if he's like an NBA superstar or something. Says totally normal and mundane things to a bunch of whacked out TV communists. And everybody's like, oh, thank goodness this guy's around. While at the same time also mocking CNN because they put all this money in. They have all the pharma sponsorships. They've been around for about 20 years, like as a main force in the news, maybe longer than that. Obviously, I mean, I think that they started in the late 80s with Ted Turner or something. But the last 20 years, CNN has been like right front and center. 25 years, I guess we should say, of the public conversation. But no one really watches them anymore. So if some normie totally owns the libs on CNN, what difference does it make? The only difference it makes is if we go and share it all around. And for some reason, truthers still do that. I don't know. Some triggered person was just getting mad at me on Truth Social. They were a big fan of Fox News. They didn't like that I called Jeanine Pirro a TV character. We'll talk about that later. People in the truth community are keeping the mainstream media alive. It's incredible. Let us continue. So we have talked numerous times about His Majesty the Pope. That's not what they call him, right? His Excellency, is that what they call him? He has one of those names, right? Somebody, I hope that if there are Catholics in the audience, you will A, not be offended, because that would be ridiculous. And B, tell me what they call him. His papacy? Anyhow, this is how you know there's a new pope. You see some seagulls and white smoke. And then everybody cheers like they just won the Super Bowl. Now, I got to say, as far as signals of a new beginning go, maybe white smoke is the way to go. It is kind of better than hearing Rachel Maddow say, polls have closed in Arizona and we can announce a winner. But that's basically what it is. They have a fake election. It's all done behind closed doors with a bunch of cardinals. Some of them can vote, some of them can't. And then they choose a winner. And the winner they chose is apparently a man named Robert Prevost or Prevost, whichever, or Prevost or Prevost, not sure. Pope Leo XIV looked the other way when confronted with child sex abuse allegations against priests in his Chicago church from the Daily Mail. Now, this did not just break yesterday. Of course, when a pope is named, stuff like this is going to go viral, but this has been reported since last year. Who knows if that was in anticipation of this man becoming the next pope? You never know how long in advance these things are planned out. Certainly, we have talked about death announcements being planned out in advance. The people who are actually in control of all these situations know what's going to happen. And I think that we can say that with some degree of confidence, generally speaking. It's true of world elections. It's true of choosing the next pope. There are powerful, powerful forces in this world, no matter how powerful the American president is, generally speaking, or has been, aside from Donald Trump. No matter how powerful the pope is, there are still systems of power above that. And so if there was any hint that this man might be chosen, the strategy, the counter strategy would be then to seed media stories that upon his choosing, people would find and then allow to shape their opinion of the new pope. Now, is this representative of who this pope is? I have no idea. We're going to have to wait and find out. Maybe some of you know. If you know, by all means, let the chat know, and I'll try to take a look. But I just heard of this guy yesterday, and I'm guessing that many of you just heard of him yesterday as well. I did see, however, that Steve Bannon said that he wanted Cardinal Sarah, that's the African cardinal who was mentioned as one of the finalists. Another finalist, by the way, his name is one of the greatest names ever. It's Pierre Battista Pizzaballa. Pierre Battista Pizzaballa. I've been saying that over and over in my head all day and just laughing at it over and over again. Pierre Battista Pizzaballa, which is better than yesterday, because yesterday I had the chorus of Kanye West's new song stuck in my head. And if you're familiar with the song, you know what that is. And you don't want that in your head all day. It is infectious. I'm sure he meant to do that. He's the best at doing it. And boy, did he do it. But so Bannon wanted Cardinal Sarah. That's what he said. But he said last week that a dark horse candidate for the new pope would be Robert Prevost. We're going to call him Prevost. That's what I'm going to go with. 4 choices. Going to go with that one. If I'm wrong, so be it. How does Steve Bannon know that? Now, if you're me, you think Steve Bannon has an inside track to some information out there in the world that's being processed and dealt with at a very high level. I think that he is upstream from us and upstream from the mainstream media. We, unfortunately, are downstream from the mainstream media, and we can do everything possible to do the best we can, analyzing all of the open source intelligence that's out there, all the media, all the rumors we hear, everything that comes our direction. But we will never be upstream where people making decisions know things, nor will we be at that first level below that where the messages begin to be formulated and disseminated. So if you think of Steve Bannon that way, maybe you think they did know this in advance. Steve Bannon knew it in advance. And some of the detractors of the new Pope Leo XIV are just kind of running interference on all these things. And then you would apply the same thing to his posts on Twitter. Now, I know that that's not the sort of explanation a lot of people are going to get down with, and that's fine. It's just a possibility among other possibilities, information among other information. It's one way to analyze the situation. His Twitter used to be filled with support for liberal causes, support for the COVID agenda, etc. On the other hand, he's against abortion and apparently was a registered Republican and voted in Republican primaries. So the whole thing's very strange. It's hard to know what to make of him. And then we have a story like this. So let's just get into this and we'll go through it quickly. The newly elected Pope Leo XIV is facing accusations of looking the other way when confronted with child sex abuse allegations against a priest. I don't know if this is priest or multiple priests. In his Chicago and South American churches, it has emerged. Robert Prevost, who became the first North American pontiff on Thursday, was accused by a survivors group of failing to act upon allegations of abuse in the U.S. and Peru, concerns they relayed to the cardinals who selected him. So not only did Prevost No, all the Cardinals knew as well and chose him anyway. Does that mean that something corrupt is happening and that the church has not learned its lesson from past sex abuse scandals? Could be that. Or it could be that they know these allegations aren't to be taken seriously. And they would be in a better position to know than I certainly would. And I'm guessing many of you as well, because this is what we have to go on. And it's not much. Prevost was said to have looked past allegations in Chicago, where he grew up, after Augustinian priest Father James Ray was allowed to live at the St. John Stone Friary in Hyde Park, despite having been removed from ministering to the public years prior over accusations of abusing minors. The new pope allegedly didn't notify the heads of St. Thomas the Apostle Catholic School, an elementary school half a block from the friary, because the church said at the time Ray was supposed to be closely monitored in the friary. Prevost also faced criticism for not having opened a formal church investigation into alleged sexual abuse carried out by two priests in the diocese of Chiclayo, Peru, which he led from 2014 to 2023. SNAP and other groups say they had made the 135 eligible cardinals who selected him well aware of Prevost's alleged inaction on the allegations. So I suppose that we will probably get more information on this in the future. And for now, we're just going to have to wait and see. I'm sure Catholics probably have additional insight into this. I am not a Catholic. Matt Walsh posted yesterday that if you are a Catholic, then you understand this as ordained by God. And so parsing his political statements doesn't make a lot of sense. And then immediately in the next post, he began to parse the Pope's politics. So I'm not sure exactly what to make of that. I think we had, oh no, we don't have any more Pope stuff. We're going to move on from the Pope. And a couple of weeks ago, we talked about how the Pope Francis, had replaced Pope Benedict in what many call a color revolution, or that style of replacement. Make sure to get rid of this leader, however necessary, and replace him with someone under control, someone who's meant to be in that position for another reason besides getting the position legitimately and then serving with the full authority of that position. And I compared that situation to Joe Biden. And like Biden, the Pope didn't even live at the normal papal residency. And so I think it's very funny to consider the possibility that the patterns we've seen in the United States, the patterns we've seen in Brazil and elsewhere might be repeated at the Vatican. And one last thing, actually, somebody mentioned this in my Telegram chat yesterday. I can't remember who it is. I think it was Spetzel or EC. Very good observation, very astute observation, that the Vatican is one of the three city-states, Washington, D.C., the City of London, and Vatican City. And if you are attuned to that theory, the financial center is the City of London. The military center is Washington, D.C. Military and governance center is Washington, D.C. And then kind of the spiritual and cultural center would then be at Vatican City. And so the American Pope at Vatican City on the same day, and we will talk about this in just a few minutes, on the same day that Trump's big announcement turns out to be a trade deal with the United Kingdom. So does that mean that the UK has been put into submission? If you go along with the submission theory that was put out there many years ago, I think it's probably downstream from the Q operation, though I've seen it proposed separately, and it's certainly easily analyzable without that background, just considering that maybe Russia and China aren't the villains the propaganda media tells us they are, considering that the propaganda media lies about absolutely everything, and not only lies, but inverts everything. And so if you understand the inversion and you're listening to the television tell you who our enemies are, it might be time to think, well, wait a second. They say our government are our friends and those governments actually hate us. But we know our government censored us and debanks us and tried to poison us and certainly poisons the food. And you can just go on down the list. So maybe that other government that we're told hates us, maybe it's just reversed. And then you can begin putting it together that way. And we've spent ample time on this podcast over the years talking about things exactly like that. So Trump's in control of Washington, D.C. We saw that in January. Trump is king of the world. We've seen that a couple of times. Make of that what you will. I'm just saying what the optics are. We have the takeover of the Vatican potentially with this American Pope, and we have the trade deal in the UK that not only pulls the UK closer to our center of gravity rather than the other direction, it also drives a wedge between the UK and the EU, and we'll get to some of that too. All of it's super interesting as far as I'm concerned. Now, I want to play a couple quick video clips kind of along these lines that I think are really interesting, to be honest. And this is actually, let's start with the Trump one. I was going to go the other direction, but let's start with Trump.
I was going to do that in my first month of my second term, but my second term got delayed 4 years, unbelievably. So it would have been done.
So he's talking about fixing the air traffic control system, and that was Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy about to give a speech on that issue. Trump says it would have been done in the first month of my second term, but my second term was delayed 4 years. This is Scott Bessent in a hearing with Congressman Meeks. And this I thought was fantastic. And if you're watching and not listening, you'll be able to see Bessent's facial expression, which is priceless.
President in 2024.
One believes President Biden.
One believes? You one of those non-believers that the election, the American people didn't vote?
How about that? And how about the reaction too? Are you one of those people that believe the American people didn't vote? I doubt that he believes the American people didn't vote. I think he probably just knows that they voted in a fake election. Our elections are fake. They're all fake. Donald Trump says they're all fake. Donald Trump says the election he was in was fake. They're fake elections. And so after that, it's just a power struggle. It's a leverage play. Will the global regime and their uniparty faction in the United States be able to prop up a fake presidency like Joe Biden? And will the media go along with them? And will the people accept that and believe it or not? That's all it comes down to. And just as a reminder, here's Donald Trump talking about those fake elections from last year.
Sports has always been something that Americans rally around to come together. They really do. You won the popular vote. You won all the swing states. But still, Kamala Harris got 75 million votes in the country.
Well, if you believe the whole thing.
Yeah, okay. Let's just say
it is ridiculous.
That the election was as it was.
Excuse me. There are 7 swing states. I won them all.
You did
by a lot.
But let me just get to the dismount here.
And I won the popular.
Have you thought about how to try to bring the country together?
The whole thing was ridiculous. What else needs saying? So we talked the other day about Ed Martin and his nomination for U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. Yesterday, that was withdrawn by Donald Trump. And let's go to that first. Here is Trump in the Oval Office yesterday. This is from the same press conference, press event for the announcement of the trade deal.
Your nominee for U.S. Attorney of D.C. Do you have a backup plan if this Senate does
not? But he's a terrific person, and he wasn't getting the support from people that I thought. You know, he's done a very good job. Crime is down 25% in D.C. During his period of time. I'm very disappointed in that. But I have so many different things that I'm doing now with the trade. You know, I'm one person. I can only make, boom, I can only lift that little phone so many times in a day. But we have somebody else that will be great. I just want to say Ed is unbelievable, and hopefully we can bring him into.
I cut that off too early. Apologies. Another hilarious Trump clip from that event, though, before we continue on with Ed Martin.
You know, there are 3 or 4 of them that do it. And when they took over, Buttigieg, who has no clue, you know, he drives to work on his bicycle with his, in all fairness, with his husband on the back, which is a nice, loving relationship.
Oh, man, that's amazing. Trump is so funny. He's just so funny. He's talking about Pete Buttigieg. He calls him Buttigieg, and he says he's got no clue about transportation, of course. He rides to work on his bicycle, in all fairness, with his husband on the back. It's a good, loving relationship. All right. Hilarious. But back to Ed Martin. After the withdrawal of the Ed Martin nomination, Trump went ahead and nominated to the same position, or appointed to the interim position. And I guess that makes her the nominee if she's confirmed. But he said on Truth Social in the evening yesterday, I'm pleased to announce that Judge Jeanine Pirro will be appointed interim U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia. Jeanine was assistant district attorney for Westchester County, New York, and then went on to serve as county judge and district attorney, where she was the first woman ever to be elected to those positions. During her time in office, Jeanine was a powerful crusader for victims of crime. Her establishment of the Domestic Violence Bureau in her prosecutor's office was the first in the nation. She excelled in all ways. In addition to her legal career, Jeanine previously hosted her own Fox News show, Justice with Judge Jeanine, for 10 years, and is currently co-host of The Five, one of the highest rated shows on television. Jeanine is incredibly well qualified for this position and is considered one of the top district attorneys in the history of the state of New York. She is in a class by herself. Congratulations, Jeanine. And so another television character and another cast member of Fox News has been plucked from the television and placed within the Trump administration. The newest member of the fantasy team is Jeanine Pirro. Maybe this will be excellent. I'm sure that she's a competent person. I know a lot of people like her on Fox News. It is very strange, however, that such a large number of members of the administration are Fox News cast members. That's just strange. Sean Duffy's one, Brooke Rollins is one, Pete Hegseth is one, Tulsi Gabbard and Robert F. Kennedy have certainly spent enough time on television, although RFK not so much on Fox News. Tulsi Gabbard used to sit in for Tucker Carlson. And of course, all these people are cast members of the Tucker Carlson show as well. So it's a very strange job. Might be good, might be bad. Don't know. Is he pulling these people out of these positions to reduce the interest in Fox News? Entirely possible. I don't know that to be true, but it's entirely possible. Is he doing it to spotlight some of these people? Maybe. Is he doing it because they're excellent communicators and they can deliver the messaging properly to the American people? I think that might be the most likely answer. Not necessarily sure that's true, but I think that that's probably the case. And so Judge Jeanine will do that from this position for the next 120 days. Maybe there are certain tasks that she's going to be perfect for in the role as U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. We shall see. Now, it's interesting. Trump withdrew the nomination and placed another person as the interim rather than let the period expire so that Judge Boasberg would then pick whoever the next U.S. attorney would be. That would be a bad situation because the president would then have to nominate someone and have the Senate confirm that person to end up replacing the Judge Boasberg selection. So this was a move to prevent that. Now, whether that was the plan all along, because Trump, as you just heard him say, had a backup plan, I don't know the answer to that. It certainly could have been the plan all along. It's also possible that the Republicans just dragged their feet and the time was going to run out, so he needed to make a move. We shall see. If it's the case that it was the plan all along, then perhaps Tom Tillis was out there communicating to the public the reason why the Ed Martin nomination had to be withdrawn and Ed Martin was then moved. Maybe that says something good about Tom Tillis. I don't know what the right answer is, but I think it's worth considering all the sides here. Let's continue. Here is Trump announcing the new positions for Ed Martin on Truth Social yesterday. Ed Martin has done an amazing job as interim U.S. attorney and will be moving to the Department of Justice as the new director of the Weaponization Working Group, Associate Deputy Attorney General, and pardon attorney. In these highly important roles, Ed will make sure we finally investigate the weaponization of our government under the Biden regime and provide much needed justice for its victims. Congratulations, Ed. And that's quite interesting. Maybe this will be an even more effective place to have someone like Ed Martin, who cares deeply, it seems, about the weaponization of government against the American people. And I would expect motion in that direction in the near future. Liz Harrington, who you must know that I really enjoy. I think she's great. Former Trump spokesperson, Liz Harrington. She posts a repost of Ed Martin saying, "Thank you, Mr. President. We will make America great again." And she adds on, "Be careful what you wish for, commies." And I think that that is very appropriate. You got to love when people are just throwing around commies like that. I used to do that quite a lot. Here is Ed Martin again. He also said, "Eagle unleashed." So that's Eagle Ed Martin talking about himself, saying that he has been unleashed at this new position. I like it. Got to say, I like it. Let us switch gears. We talked about election fraud the other day to some extent. This is from the Federalist. Filing Smartmatic hid meeting with Dem mega donor who financed its suit against 2020 election reporting. And again, if you watched Wednesday on the subscriber stream, we also discussed the democracy playbook for 2025 put out by the Brookings Institution and normalizing, and a Twitter thread that discussed all the many ways that the administrative bureaucratic deep state and its allies in the private sector, in law and academia and media, etc., would come together with a plan that they will all execute to continue the subversion of Donald Trump. And I talked about how this is exactly the sort of thing I was warning about all year last year, while the normie truthers and people playing match online were telling everybody to vote hard. Didn't matter how hard you voted. Election was fake. The subversion was already designed. And that is what we're seeing play out now. It's just a matter of whether or not the people go along with it. That's the dictating factor for all of this stuff, which is why we advance as quickly as possible so other people can advance as well. And so that we can help other people advance, because we need to get way past where the normie truthers are. It's just not going to work. Yeah, the subversion is pervasive. And it was obvious that this would happen throughout. Again, as I said the other day, Trump has a number of trump cards left to play. So there's no reason to be depressed or upset or anything about the state of things. But the rest of the government at the local and state levels and in the federal government and all of the other uniparty apparatus that feeds into that government and benefits from that regime government, they're all still aligned against Donald Trump, and they have some power. It's not like they have no power, and it's not like they have no people. It might only be 25 or 30% of the population who has any motivation to help that side whatsoever. It might even be fewer than that. But even if that's the case, it's still tens of millions of people and some pretty powerful institutions and company with unlimited money behind them because the regime prints the money. I don't think they have the military. I don't think they have any of those things. And I think that the people are waking up quickly. So I think we're in good shape. But we still need to advance past that. And as I reiterated this morning with Brian on Badlands Daily, Trump could be the greatest president who ever lived, exercising the full authority of his office under the Constitution and perhaps beyond, since we're kind of in a post-constitutional state right now as it is. And that doesn't mean he can still fix everything at the state level. And so that's going to be about the people waking up and pressing forward rather than soothing themselves with cheerleaders and watching match be played online. Oh, look, this thing matches this other thing, therefore winning. Okay. Smartmatic, the electronic tabulator company suing Fox News for alleged defamation following the 2020 election, failed in a February court hearing to disclose a meeting with Democrat megadonor Reid Hoffman. Newly unsealed court documents allege. And it's also worth remembering, I mean, the Epstein thing this week, let's steer off into the Epstein zone for just a second, because Reid Hoffman is reportedly one of the people involved with Jeffrey Epstein. And this week we had James O'Keefe, formerly of Project Veritas, now O'Keefe Media Group, telling us that he had such incredible bombshell breaking news to deliver to the American public in the form of hidden camera videos that he was fearing for his life, and let us know he was not suicidal. And I'm glad to know that James O'Keefe is not suicidal. I think that James O'Keefe, he's a guy I respect. I think he's done a lot of great work. I think some of that, or maybe even all of it, is a very clever way to disseminate whistleblower testimony from within organizations while giving some plausible deniability to the whistleblowers. Makes them look like they were kind of, they were just they got an online date, and that online date went out with them, started asking all these questions, and they were very, trying to be very impressive. And so they gave up all the inside info. Totally possible. Totally possible. It's also possible it's all a massive, very clever, very well orchestrated info op to allow whistleblowers to bring their stories to the public in a way that'll go viral and that people will understand. And that can be a good and wonderful thing that James O'Keefe deserves our respect and gratitude for. Okay. So nothing against James O'Keefe, but the two bombshells that he promised this week were total flops. The first was a hidden camera video of a man named John Bryan, who I guess had an affair with, I think it's Sarah Ferguson or something like that. Andrew's wife. I care very little about the royal soap opera. We have our own soap opera to deal with here. But the major claim was that this man on hidden video claimed that Prince Andrew was having sex with minors. Of course, that's disgusting if it's true. And we've heard that it's true from people like Virginia Giuffre, etc. And we don't necessarily know the validity of those claims. You know, a lot of what people think is true in this situation is the substance of that are claims made in lawsuits and in testimony and in depositions. All of it might be true, but it's not like no one's ever lied in a lawsuit, and it's not like no one's ever lied in a deposition. We're talking about things getting played out at a very high level. Regardless, John Bryan made those claims. John Bryan was trying to be the most impressive guy that anyone's ever heard of. in that 5-minute clip. And he comes across as totally unbelievable and actually makes the underlying claims less believable because he is so over the top about them. So that was day one. And by the way, this entire time, Alex Jones was serving as the hype man, but also as James O'Keefe's kill switch. In case anything happened to James O'Keefe, Alex Jones was going to release the information. And so yesterday there was meant to be a follow-up, another bombshell revelation. And the bombshell revelation was exactly what Pam Bondi went out on television and said to the public on Wednesday morning. She had said it in a hidden camera video, and the story then had to shift to, isn't it strange she just said something like this to a stranger? Maybe it's strange, or maybe it's nothing. Maybe she has no problem talking about tens of thousands of photos and videos, hours of video footage of Jeffrey Epstein and abused minors. Okay. She says that's what the FBI is going through now. Maybe that's all true. Or maybe just got to be prepared for it, because this is one of the Epstein stuff has been hyped absolutely everywhere. Fox News, Tucker Carlson, all sorts of locations. And we've heard about it and we've gotten a rug. And we've heard about it and we've gotten a rug. And we've heard about it and we've gotten a rug. And that process has been playing out for like the last 5 or 6 years. Rug after rug after rug after rug after rug. Okay. The Epstein files release, as we saw a few weeks ago, was a rug. This James O'Keefe thing, I don't know what to make of this, but there was really not much there. If anything, this only makes the whole thing appear more like a rug. And so just, word to the wise, when things are going this strangely and are not really working out in the way one might imagine they would, take a step back and observe rather than participate. Snowcat operator in the chat, 5 subscriptions gifted. Thank you very much for that. And I would imagine that the people in the chat who just snagged those are thanking you for that as well. And I do see some thank yous for that. That's nice. It's nice when everyone's nice. It's nice when everyone is nice to Snowcat, who's my pal. And good to see you at the last start, my friend. Also, if you can, go ahead and hit the thumbs up as you are watching this, if you are watching on Rumble, or I guess if you're watching somewhere else as well. But that stuff is probably not terribly helpful because my channel is so small, but maybe it helps the channel grow, and I would appreciate it. Let's get back to the article on Reid Hoffman, however. Who knows if the Reid Hoffman aspect is a rug as well. Following the 2020 election, both Fox News and Newsmax, quote, hosted commentators who aired concerns that tabulators were not secure, were vulnerable to voter fraud, and had possibly changed Trump votes to Biden votes, as described in these pages by Logan Washburn. Smartmatic sued, arguing the comments amounted to defamation. Fox previously settled a suit with Dominion Voting over similar allegations, while Newsmax recently settled with Smartmatic for $40 million. As Washburn reported, Fox had previously expressed concerns about a deep-pocketed third party behind the suit, allegations that Smartmatic denied in 2023, according to Reuters. But reporting from the Washington Post revealed Hoffman invested millions in Smartmatic as the company sued news outlets for their reporting about the 2020 election. In July 2024, the Post reported that Hoffman had, quote, connected with Smartmatic chief executive Antonio Mujica, I think it's Mujica, but it might be Mujica, through friends of friends, and was, quote, boosting its lawsuit against Fox. Now, I think maybe the Smartmatic one is separate, but the Fox Dominion lawsuit was a complete and total farce. In the discovery for that lawsuit, it was clear from Dominion's own discovery documents that their systems were incapable of providing a reliable result that accurately reflects the will and intent of the voters. And that all by itself should be enough to get Fox off in a defamation lawsuit. But instead of that, they settled for an enormous amount, $787 million, more than Dominion is even worth. And that seems like a friendly lawsuit. And perhaps this one is as well. And again, I'd remind you that perhaps, just perhaps, Fox News is not our best friend. So there's that aspect. But to refocus back on the democracy playbook from Norm Eisen that we discussed the other day, consider what it means that they have global philanthropists and these billionaires prepared to fund endless lawfare to protect any part of the corrupt uniparty, evil twin faction regime apparatus in this country that steals our elections and honestly oppresses people while profiting greatly. This amount of wealth allows for that lawfare to happen. It's being funded from these regime-oriented billionaires. It's a whole system. And you can see the system at work, which is why we need to understand that the elections are fake and that the solution is going to be a lot more complex than cheerleading and eating popcorn and playing match online. Now, if you have a busy life and you just want to stay positive about all this stuff, that's fine. But if you're trying to inform yourself so that you can make good decisions in the future and so that perhaps you can lead your family someplace to a better place in the future, or take an active role in your community and be helpful, then it's probably important to actually understand the system, which requires learning about it and analyzing it rather than applauding whatever the television does because it matches something you saw 7 years ago. Just saying. In the chat, Polymathanon, $5. Everyone in this chat is great. Just saying. Even APL agrees with that. Wow. Impressive. Nicely done. All right. Let us shift gears into the geopolitical portion of the program that will lead us cleanly, I imagine, into the long-awaited segment about the International Crisis Group and their report on Trump's first 100 days. This was from the afternoon yesterday in Reuters. Under Trump, Saudi civil nuclear talks delinked from Israel recognition, sources say. And yesterday, sources also said that Trump was cutting ties with Benjamin Netanyahu. I don't actually believe that's true. Now, whether that story was fed intentionally to the media, fine. It might be true. I'm not saying it's not true. And I'm not saying I'd be upset that it is true. And I'm not saying that I think Trump has some long-term emotional commitment to Benjamin Netanyahu. I just think that that is a convenient headline to balance out or to go along with other stuff like this right here and any potential for additional iterations of the Abraham Accords, any other peace deals, an Iran nuclear deal. All of these things are on the table right now. And if you're the regime, and if you're the regime proxy state in the Middle East known as Israel, you would want to stop those things, because the neoconservative worldview and the global regime project broadly requires those things not to happen. They need the constant threat of nuclear war. They need enemies set up all over the world where terrible things can happen. And you have to wonder if all of this is much more intricately linked. And while we are now on the subject of Israel, I don't know if people saw I'll take this down for a second. I don't know if people saw the issue with Dave Portnoy from Barstool Sports over the weekend, apparently at a nightclub he owns or bar he owns. one of the groups of bottle waitresses. Now, from my time in the club world, I understand exactly what this is. You make a reservation for a VIP table. To have that reservation and have your group at that table, it requires the purchase of what they call bottle service, which means that a bottle of liquor is brought to your table with various mixers, and a waitress pours you drinks at the table rather than you having to go and wait at the bar. And the bottles of liquor are usually escalated in price about 10x. So a $40 bottle of vodka will cost $400 for the table service, and you'll probably have 1 or 2 or 3 as a minimum that you have to buy to have the table. And so that's what was happening then. And when people order bottles, particularly expensive bottles, sometimes nightclubs will do something special to show everybody else in the room that that table is spending a lot of money. And in some club environments, that will cause other tables to spend a lot of money because they want the attention. Okay. And so in the course of that process over the weekend at Dave Portnoy's bar in Philadelphia, the waitresses brought out a sign that looks like a movie marquee. They just replaced the letters with a different message. And the sign says, F the Jews. Okay. Now, you can make all the free speech cases that you want. I don't think anyone would like it if it said F the whites or F the blacks. It's not in good taste. Okay. I don't think it's the end of the world. I don't think it's the sign of an atrocity committed. All right. I don't think it's even part of a trend necessarily, but it's not great. So, and the flip side of that is that I also think it's probably an info op. But just to clear that out, okay? So apparently 2 guys are blamed for buying the table and requesting that message, and 2 waitresses are fired for preparing that message and bringing it over. I guess they should have known better and not done what the guys paying them a lot of money wanted them to do, because of course it went viral and then it caused all these problems. So Dave Portnoy had an aneurysm online over the weekend, and he said that he wants to destroy these kids' lives. And this is all in the scope of people on, not even necessarily the MAGA right, but people associated kind of in the same general cultural milieu, being called woke right. So his immediate thing was to dox and attempt to cancel these guys, but also wanted to send them to Auschwitz so they could see what it was really like. Does that happen when you're at Auschwitz, or are you just told stories? I don't know. I don't know how you could see what it's really like and come back a changed person without determining that that's what you were going to do, or without sustaining significant emotional abuse for a period of time. I don't know. So something about that seemed very strange. The kids who were responsible, or at least one of the kids who was responsible, went on the Stu Peters show. And Stu Peters is like the most glowing ass dude in the world. Like, the dude glows. He seems like he is part of a controlled opposition info op on the extreme right. The sort of person that Jordan Peterson and James Lindsay would easily identify as woke right. And it's a perfect gambit on their part. And the funny thing is, you know, we picked out some of these things back in 2022 during the Ron DeSantis op and the Ukraine stuff. And, you know, it's my longtime theory that the NAFO thing kind of translated into the Ron DeSantis op. But those Ron DeSantis people kept trying to paint MAGA supporters as like woke or leftist or anything like that. And I was like just constantly battling with them on Twitter and making fun of these people because they're woke compared to us. Okay. They're not based. They're not red pilled. They're not interesting, but they want to paint their opposition as that, because if you exist outside of the controlled opposition, well, they have to figure out some way to communicate to everybody within the controlled opposition that actually they're not outside the controlled opposition. They're the enemies within this thing. And James Lindsay and Jordan Peterson have done a lot of work to attempt to do that. It doesn't seem to be working. They did do a podcast together this week. I've listened to part of it. It's, as you would expect, it's self-refuting, which is the problem with both of their theories broadly. And because of that, it's kind of embarrassing, but I'm sure that they will convince people who already hate MAGA. Now, aside from that, there are really people in a pro-Nazi, anti-Israel op that is controlled opposition, so that the stories of atrocity, when they come, will be believed because everybody's witnessed it online. That's the point, okay? And that playbook is exactly the same playbook from the lead up to World War II, and especially in 1933. Read the transfer agreement. I encourage everybody to read the transfer agreement. It's written by a Zionist. It's in its 3rd edition. The epilogue is written by the former head of the ADL, Abe Foxman. Okay. So it's as Zionist regime approved a book as you could ever come across. And in that, they still lay out what the media effort was to convince people to go along with their program. And their plan was a partnership between the Zionists and the Nazis to confiscate the property of European Jews and move them down to Palestine to establish the quote unquote Jewish ethno-state that they now call Israel. That's just what it was. Okay. And so we can see the same info op happening now. I talked about this a little bit at GART last weekend. When we look back on 2020 and the Black Lives Matter movement broadly, where are the atrocities? Okay. Now, I'm not saying nobody ever died. Nobody was ever hurt. I'm not saying racism's not real. I'm not saying no white man's ever attacked a black man. Okay. But did we have this massive wave of atrocities in our society? No, we did not. No, we did not. That's why they had to invent so many of them. And that's why they had to go so strong on the cultural stuff. That's why they had to stoop as low as, what do they call it? Cultural appropriation. They just had the Met Gala thing on Monday night, and the theme of the Met Gala was dressing like black people. The same people who castigated everyone for cultural appropriation made the theme of the Met Gala dressing like black people. They called it black dandyism because you dress like a dandy, like all the, I don't know what you call it, the flashy dressing. That was what the Met Gala, which is supposed to be the most high fashion thing imaginable. That's what it was all about. Anyhow, there is a real purpose for that op. That op exists. It's funded. It's coordinated. You can watch with the timing of the messaging. Okay. It's not a mistake that it's out there. Now, yesterday, Kanye released that song, and it's, I'm going to get myself canceled. It's called Heil Hitler. Okay. That's what the Kanye song is called. And it says that in the chorus over and over again. And of course, it says the N-word throughout. And I would imagine, sorry, I was trying to recollect my thoughts. I would imagine that that song was known about by people like Dave Portnoy, and the op in the club to bring the sign out that says F the Jews would then thwart the Kanye West song preemptively. I believe it's a preemptive first strike info op to make it so that DJs in clubs all around the country this weekend are going to be afraid to play Kanye West's song, because Dave Portnoy has told absolutely everybody that if you do this sort of thing in the club, we are going to destroy your life. So we will see. I would guess that tomorrow and Sunday, we are going to see a whole lot of viral videos of clubs playing that new Kanye song. And maybe next week we will have endless think pieces. What could be better than endless think pieces? Valesco 16 in the chat, $5. Newark, New Jersey mayor just arrested for trying to break into ICE facility. And I'm going to assume you mean immigration and customs enforcement. And he's not just renting a snow cone machine for the weekend, although that would be a lot more fun. Maybe he should do that. Maybe that would be better. Maybe people would like that a lot more. Oh, well, let's actually, let's pause for a second and then we'll get into the Saudi and Israel stuff. Let's bring you a word from Truth Social. And as I said before, I'm on Truth Social. I like Truth Social. You can find me on Truth Social, as it says on the screen, at I'm Your Moderator. But if you're looking for a great place online for news, discussion, and entertainment, then check out Truth Social, Donald Trump's social media website. You'll get breaking news stories and commentary from top media figures and also people who seem to be shadow banned on the platform like me. If you want to see Trump's legendary Truth Social posts, then get on Truth Social today. Join a growing community of patriots on a free speech platform designed to avoid censorship and cancellation by big tech. Make your voice heard. Join the movement. Join Truth Social. And I think for the most part, they are a pretty good free speech site. And it's a good thing that there is this kind of outpost in case it's ever needed, in case the mainstream social media platforms bring their censorship back more into the fore. And honestly, Twitter's not a free speech site. You know, people complain, hey, I saw a post get hidden behind a sensitive warning on Truth Social. Yeah, well, you don't see that on Twitter. You also just don't see the posts at all. Remember, freedom of speech, not freedom of reach, is what they promise. You can post whatever you want sometimes, but they have very advanced algorithms to make sure that no one ever sees it. So what are you left with? I don't know. I think the free speech alternatives are better when you can use them. And so I would encourage people to do that. And as I said, I'm on there. I spend most of my time on there and on Telegram. So let's get back to this Reuters article. Under Trump, Saudi civil nuclear talks delinked from Israel recognition, sources say. The United States is no longer demanding Saudi Arabia normalize ties with Israel as a condition for progress on civil nuclear cooperation talks. Two sources with knowledge of the matter told Reuters ahead of U.S. President Donald Trump's visit next week. Now, we're already into the land of two sources familiar. There's no reason to believe that this is definitely true. We're going to go over it because this is what we're being told. This is part of the narrative now, and we'll see how the narrative effects play out and the balance of power shifts, the balance of these negotiations. Maybe it makes a difference. Maybe it doesn't. It might not even be true, but it does exist as a story to leverage people's opinions. And so we have to, that is the real part of all of this that we can deal with. That's the part that we can grasp onto, attempt to understand, and attempt to react to. Reacting to the reality of fake news stories is absolutely pointless, which is, again, why playing at the speed of the fake news is pointless unless you want to stay asleep forever. If you want to stay asleep forever, watch TV, eat popcorn, play Match Online, and cheerlead. If not, then it's important to understand that these are narratives being peddled out. And if we want to get anywhere closer, not only just to the truth, which is potentially impossible, there might not be any truth underlying this, but to be able to figure out how to guide our lives, we have to do better than that. Okay. And that's the point. It's not that that stuff's wrong. Like, don't do any of it. Don't pay attention to any of it. It's that it's not getting us anywhere. Okay. Maybe it's getting some people somewhere. I doubt it, because it hasn't really gotten anybody anywhere for years, particularly when the purveyors of that stuff are just saying vote hard and calling our elections real. So again, word to the wise, but do whatever the hell you want, you know? Dropping the demand that Saudi Arabia establish diplomatic relations with Israel would be a major concession by Washington. Under former President Joe Biden, not president, nuclear talks were an element of a wider U.S.-Saudi deal tied to normalization and to Riyadh's goal of a defense treaty with Washington. The kingdom has repeatedly said it would not recognize Israel without a Palestinian state, frustrating Biden administration attempts to expand the Abraham Accords signed during Trump's first term. Under those accords, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Morocco normalized relations with Israel. Progress towards Saudi recognition of Israel has been halted by fury in Arab countries over the war raging in Gaza. The nuclear talks also stumbled over Washington's non-proliferation concerns. And it is important to note the recognition of the Palestinian state, because the leaders from Palestine are at Russia's victory parade with all those other countries. They recognize a Palestinian state. I think it's like 46 countries in the world. Actually, I'm going to ask the machine about this because it's an important thing. How many nations recognize Palestine as a state? How many for Israel? And the machine says, hold for processing. The machine says, hold for processing. As of May 2025, the recognition of Palestine and Israel by the United Nations member states is as follows. The state of Palestine is recognized as a sovereign state by 147 out of 193 UN member states. Israel is recognized by 164. So 29 countries, primarily in the Middle East and North Africa, including Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen, do not recognize Israel due to the political conflicts in solidarity with the Palestinian cause. Okay? 147 countries in the world already recognize a Palestinian state. That's 75% of the UN. And we are still being given the runaround about a two-state solution. That's not acceptable to the neocons, to the regime, and to whatever evil twin faction is in Israel. And do I know that the evil twin faction is in power in Israel? No, I don't. I'm hopeful that the good twin faction is in power, or that whatever members of the evil twin faction remain in power, they are fully under control, or at least mostly under control, a la Joe Biden. Okay. So to most of the world, a two-state solution is a must. Otherwise, Israel is questioning Palestine's right to exist, right? Isn't that the framing? Are you questioning Israel's right to exist? Well, we can question any state's right to exist, can't we? If they stole the territory? That's what all the wokes do about the Native Americans, right? Russia and Ukraine is this same issue. Taiwan and China is this same issue. Guyana and Venezuela is this same issue. All right. It's just these two states, one of them created by the regime. Israel was created as a proxy state for the regime by the regime 80 years ago. There are countries in the world that don't recognize Israel's right to exist. And Saudi Arabia, they wanted Saudi Arabia to normalize relations with Israel. And to do that, Israel would have to accept the two-state solution. Now, the two-state solution is already a thing, all right? They already recognize a Palestinian state. So you can put the war aside and understand that however long it takes into the future, there's going to be a Palestinian state there. Maybe it's going to be in the Sinai Peninsula, which is kind of what I think. There's going to be territory maybe given away by multiple sides in this. And then the Ben Gurion Canal will run along, and that is maybe what the building project in Gaza will ultimately entail, if there is one. We'll see how it goes. Okay. That's my read on it. I know that that's not maybe anybody else's read on it. And I find myself in that territory quite often, which is just how it is. And I am A-okay with it. And I think that all of you are A-okay with it. And it's too bad that more people aren't A-okay with it, because if we continue not being okay with things like that, we are going to be stuck here forever. I don't want to be. I I don't want to be stuck here forever, to tell you the truth. I think that we can advance well beyond this, and I wish that we would advance beyond the television. Let us continue a bit more with Israel here. This is from, I guess, last night, technically. In Axios, Trump had private meeting with Netanyahu advisor ahead of Mideast trip. Wait, what? I thought he was cutting ties. President Trump met Israeli Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer, a close confidant of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, on Thursday, and discussed the nuclear talks with Iran and the war in Gaza, according to two sources briefed on the meeting. The meeting at the White House, which was not made public by the U.S. or Israel, took place ahead of the fourth round of nuclear talks between the U.S. and Iran on Sunday in Muscat, and President Trump's trip to the Middle East starting on Monday. Trump will visit Saudi, Qatar, and the UAE, but will skip Israel. All right. So it's always important to mention that when we are dealing with two sources briefed on a meeting where the meeting was not made public, what we have are either leakers or people who have been directed to leak this information. And so the provenance of the information matters. Which of those two things, which of those two options, was it people tasked with leaking this, quote unquote, or was it actual leakers trying to undermine these negotiations? Which one of those went to the press? Well, that makes a big difference in how we determine the truth value of a story like this and what the impact of this might be. Okay. Should we believe that the meeting happened? It seems like the meeting probably happened, right? So we can take that from it. That means it probably isn't true that Trump is cutting all ties to Benjamin Netanyahu. If on the same day that story comes out, he's meeting with one of Netanyahu's closest advisors, maybe this story exists specifically to refute that. Let us continue. The meeting is somewhat unusual in that presidents don't typically meet with foreign officials who are not the head of state or government. It took place 2 days after Netanyahu and his team were blindsided by Trump's announcement of a truce with the Houthis, exposing the gaps in trust and coordination between the administrations. Okay. If they were blindsided. I doubt that. But regardless, we talked about the timing on Wednesday. If you're not a paid subscriber to the show, the Wednesday episode will be streaming live as a full stream replay on Sunday afternoon. So watch it then. We talked about some of this at length. The announcement came shortly after Israel had carried out strikes on a major port and airport in Yemen in response to a Houthi attack on Tel Aviv's international airport. The Israelis were alarmed that Trump's ceasefire didn't apply to attacks on Israel. We were shocked that the Trump administration didn't tell us anything, and we learned about it from the television, one Israeli official told Axios. Now, what an interesting statement to make, because most of this stuff is totally unreliable information being brought to us from totally unreliable sources. Okay? You can imagine that a lot of what happens in the national security sphere, maybe even in the cultural sphere and the rest of it, but particularly in a national security sense, a lot of what we're told happens is directly downstream from regime-oriented intel organizations and prior the military-industrial complex and whatever regime-oriented elements of the military-industrial complex still remain. Those are the people disseminating these stories. And so if that's how the information flow always worked previously, military intelligence disseminating these stories to friendly media sources who will then report word for word what was said by the intelligence organizations and the military industrial complex, well, then they can simply world build and we'll all believe it. And if we demand evidence, which we rarely do, then they can show us some videos. They can show us some pictures. Oh, look, here's some Ukrainians with wooden automatic rifles. Oh, look, here's the ghost of Kyiv. Oh, here's a blow up plane escaping from Afghanistan. Look at these paragliding go-karts. Just saying. It doesn't actually have to be real at all. Doesn't have to be. These attacks don't have to be. And when the inside sources of mainstream media outlets are saying we had no advance warning, we didn't know this even happened, they didn't tell us, we found this out watching television. Well, yeah, because you're not in control of the information flow any longer. Someone else is. So whether they're psyops or real events, it doesn't matter because you're not controlling the narrative. This was Donald Trump. I rugged myself. I have the video still on my phone, and I did not, I believe, push it over to my I think it's this. I'm gonna go with this, and we'll play it. And if this is the wrong clip, then it will at least usher us into our next subject. But yesterday, Trump talked about our greatest ally and who our greatest ally was in his press event for the announcement of the UK trade deal.
Includes plans that will bring the United Kingdom into the economic security alignment with the United States. That's the first of its kind. So we have a big economic security blanket, and that's very important. And we feel very, very comfortable with that because it's been a great ally, truly one of our great allies. I mean, a lot of people say our greatest ally. I don't want to insult people by saying that, but I can say it's certainly one of our greatest.
So thank goodness that was the right video. If he were to call the UK our greatest ally, then certain people might be insulted. Who would those certain people be? Well, neocons and Zionists, who have been telling us for decades that Israel is our greatest ally. Is that true? Well, no, there's no way that could possibly be true. We are told that they are the only democracy in the Middle East, and that makes them our greatest allies because they're helping protect our oil or something. I don't know. I don't know what they've done. We give them tons and tons of money and protect them and essentially allow ourselves to be governed by them. How does that make them our greatest ally? I'm not saying that the UK is our greatest ally either. I don't think any regime-oriented countries are our greatest ally. And if that means we don't have a greatest ally, then so be it. I mean, if you're trying to take a realistic look at the world and understand power at the highest levels, the idea that there are allies labeled as countries around the world, this country is our greatest ally, that doesn't make any sense. Okay. Evil twin faction running UK, evil twin faction running the US, evil twin faction, and I'm not talking about right now, obviously, evil twin faction running Israel. Well, they're all the same thing. So an alliance is irrelevant. It's just factions in different places pursuing the same agenda. Okay, let us go to that trade deal. And I'm not going to, I don't think I'm going to spend a hell of a lot of time on this because there's been so much coverage of the trade deal over the past day. But this is Donald Trump on Truth Social yesterday. Today is an incredible day for America as we deliver our first fair, open, and reciprocal trade deal, something our past presidents never cared about. Together with our strong ally, the United Kingdom, we have reached the first historic trade deal since Liberation Day. As part of this deal, America will raise $6 billion in external revenue from 10% tariffs, $5 billion in new export opportunities for our great ranchers, farmers, and producers, and enhance the national security of both the U.S. and the UK through the creation of an aluminum and steel trading zone and a secure pharmaceutical supply chain. This deal shows that if you respect America and bring serious proposals to the table, America is open for business. Many more to come. Stay tuned. So we talked about this a bit before. It's important because this drives a wedge between the UK and the EU. It's important because maybe it means that the UK has kind of been brought under control to some degree. The steel thing is very interesting. There was an interesting kind of side conversation. Brooke Rollins, I believe, answered a question, and Trump took it as well, about the beef exports to the UK. They have different food standards there, which is what their claim was for why they haven't been importing American beef. And the question was, are you going to change your food standards to align with these food standards and stop pumping all those chemicals and hormones into the beef so that you can export it? And the answer was that there are a variety of kinds of beef here. We have the ones with the chemicals and the ones without the chemicals. So we already have certain beef supply that can be sent over. I thought that was really interesting, particularly with all the Robert F. Kennedy stuff going on. Trump pulled the nomination of, I want to say her name's Janice, the first name, but Neshawat. She is the sister-in-law of Mike Waltz, so it's interesting timing on that, but pulled the nomination of her as Surgeon General. People freaked out when Trump nominated her as Surgeon General because she was a COVID person. We didn't freak out over here. We just talked about the fantasy team and said, hey, guess we'll see. Well, now we've seen. But we weren't. We were told by the cheerleaders at the time, oh, you can't question Trump's picks on any of these things. Don't you trust Trump? What are you, some kind of traitor? Retarded. So she was removed. Callie Means was brought in. Or Casey Means, sorry. Callie Means is the husband. And some people have trouble with, have problems with Casey Means. I don't follow the Maha thing as much as other people do. So I'll let other people hash that out and wait and see. I don't think the Surgeon General is that important a position. I don't think any of these positions should exist as part of the government in the first place. So ultimately, I don't care. But very interesting on the beef, because that strikes right to the heart of the Maha agenda. Our food cannot be exported to certain countries because our food is not up to the standards of those countries because of how it's poisoned and delivered to our people here, which is a sad and unfortunate reality. So the first major trade deal has been done by Donald Trump. And that is just on the heels of weeks of being told that no trade deals were coming, no talks were close, none of this was happening. Trump's tariff play backfired. That was like a CNN headline on Monday or something, that it's all backfired. This is Congressman Jim Banks on Truth Social yesterday posting this from CNN.
Well, let me show you the two headlines that caught my attention. China says it's tearing down walls to expand trade alliances amid U.S. standoffs. So they're making deals with other countries to try to protect themselves. And then also India and the UK striking a trade deal. So everybody's wheeling and dealing with each other, trying to protect themselves from an over-reliance on the U.S. as a market. And we are doing what?
I guess we're not doing anything, Abby Phillips. What are you supposed to say about something like that? Just totally face planted 24 hours later. It's incredible, these people. Let us continue. Here we are. This is from the National Pulse yesterday. There you see the woman to whom Sergei Lavrov refers to as Führer Ursula. EU takes Trump to WTO, plans 95 billion euro retaliation against U.S. tariffs. Sorry. The European Union announced plans to challenge the U.S. reciprocal tariffs at the World Trade Organization and launched a public consultation on countermeasures. European Commissioner Maros Sefcovic, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, U.S. President Donald J. Trump, John Pfluger of Air Lease Corp, all involved. And let's just skip down to the in full section. The European Union has declared its intention to contest the United States reciprocal tariff policy, at the World Trade Organization. This announcement was made during a press conference held by EU Commissioner Maros Sefcovic at the EU Council building on May 7th. Okay, so that was 2 days ago, one day before Trump was announcing the big deal with the UK. The European Commission has initiated a public consultation on possible countermeasures targeting U.S. imports valued at $107.4 billion should negotiations with Washington falter. The proposed list includes a wide array of agricultural and industrial goods, notably bourbon and tequila, which have been contentious points between the transatlantic partners. President Donald J. Trump has previously threatened to impose a 200% tariff on EU alcohol imports, escalating tensions. The EU's dispute will formally begin with a consultation request as the Commission asserts that the U.S. tariffs contravene fundamental WTO rules. The EU's objective is thus to reaffirm that internationally agreed rules matter, and these cannot be unilaterally disregarded by any WTO member, including the U.S., the Commission emphasized in its statement. Well, what do we have here? We have the regime in its home in the EU going to a global governance body and attempting to convince that global governance body that it can't allow the United States and these other countries to make their own deals. It can't allow the United States to implement tariffs. Why would they do something like that? And of course, we've been talking about this from the beginning of the tariff conversation months ago. We are moving away from the top-down, centralized control system, one world, liberal, international, rules-based order. Okay? Total control over the world economy. We have to understand it that way. People will say that's not true. Those people all support the regime, or they're just really concerned about being called a conspiracy theorist. Oh, it couldn't be up that high. And maybe I'll publish the clip later today. I don't want to go all the way into it, but I talked about this at Guard over the weekend. We've talked about it before on the show. World Economic Forum, partners page, 1,000 transnational corporations. World Economic Forum, code of conduct page, lays out the code of conduct. You got to support the World Economic Forum. You can't go against the World Economic Forum. So what do all those transnational corporations do? Well, they implement the policies of the World Economic Forum and they abide by the code of conduct. And what do they have their employees do? Tens of millions of people, maybe hundreds of millions of people around the world. Well, they abide with the same code of conduct. And so all of a sudden you have normal people, normal Americans even, going about their lives, trying to just be a good employee. And by doing so, unwittingly carrying out the goals of the World Economic Forum. So it's actually not that hard to arrange a system like that and to arrange many systems like that. And of course, all the spokes of the system go out to hubs exactly like that. And that is the way that something can be totally controlled from the top while everybody believes that they are acting independently on the lower levels. It's totally opaque. They can't see all the way to the top level. So they assume it doesn't exist. And then it's just the managers. It's just their bosses, their bosses' bosses, their bosses' bosses' bosses, their owner, whatever it is, who's making all of these decisions. But it's higher, it's levels higher than that. So all of this is entirely possible. So we're moving away from the top-down centralized control over the world economy through tariffs. So countries are going to begin making deals one-to-one. The United States is going to make deals with the UK. They're going to make deals with Mexico. And well, that's probably maybe with two countries at the same time, the North American, it was called NAFTA. Now it's the USMCA, and Canada calls it like the CMUSA or something like that. I don't know. We're going to make trade deals all around the world. These conversations are going. Trump was posting today about Scott Bessent's talks with China, etc. The global governance body is becoming totally irrelevant. Does anyone believe that Donald Trump is going to allow the WTO to tell him what he can do? And so then what would the WTO leverage be? Well, they might be able to leverage smaller countries and make it so that those smaller countries can't make deals with the United States of America and then keep them under the sway of that top-down centralized control system. So that could present problems for those countries. And then it's a matter of how much Donald Trump will allow those global governing bodies to torture other countries around the world. That's their goal, to make Donald Trump relent because of the pressure they put on these second party countries who just want to be involved in trade in the United States with the United States new program. These people are sick. This is CNBC. EU to launch dispute against, oh no, sorry. That was exactly the same. I had two articles for the same story. We don't need to go through that. So we talked about the U.S. potentially leaving the WTO. There's no reason to stay in the organization if they're going to try to prevent the U.S. from making its own trade deals. And Donald Trump has already attempted to withdraw from the WHO and many of these other international agreements. Withdrawing from the WTO seems like an obvious next step. Will other countries then begin to withdraw from the WTO, which leads to the collapse of the WTO? We've been hearing over the last couple of weeks that the UN doesn't actually have the funds to continue operating the way it was. It's not able to provide, we're going to get into that in the crisis group report. It's not able to provide the resources to do the work, quote unquote, that it was doing, which is really just overthrowing countries on behalf of the global regime. These centralized governing bodies are all just collapsing before our eyes, and we should be very happy about that. And then the next step, of course, is if the UK is making its own trade deal with the United States, then it's clearly already going in a different direction than the EU. And, you know, Brexit was an indicator of that 10 years ago, but they're going in a different direction. And when countries in the EU begin going in a different direction for their trade policies, then perhaps the EU collapses. And I think that there's good reason to believe that's also coming. And again, that's something we've talked about for years. When you know what the directionality is, and you know what the enemy plan is, and you can kind of glean what the response to that is, then it's not that hard to project out into the future. Well, if the enemy wins, then the global governing bodies are more powerful than ever. And the EU is more powerful than ever, and et cetera, right? But if they lose, well, then all those organizations have to go away. The directionality is toward decentralization and fragmentation, which means that the centralizing bodies become useless and redundant and collapse. So it's not hard to predict those things. And there's no reason to believe that the directionality of any of this is changing in the least. Okay, let us continue. All right, and we have made it. We've made it all the way to the International Crisis Group report. And before we get into that, I'm going to do another one of these Rumble ads. When Rumble supports the show, I like to support Rumble. 1775 coffee. You're getting the bold, dark roast that hits harder than a CNN fact check. The smooth, medium roast, and the Vitality Mushroom coffee for clear energy and laser focus, no crash. All single origin, small batch, toxin free, and mold free. Plus, you're also getting a gold spoon clip because freedom isn't scooped with plastic, a frother strong enough to stir up your coffee and your mother-in-law's political opinions, and a black 1775 tumbler that says, I don't take life advice or caffeine from a woke sea witch. And I think that they're referring to the Starbucks logo. $170 worth of coffee and gear, yours for $99. This is for the ones who've been watching 1775 blow up on Rumble, wondering if it's actually worth it. Spoiler alert, it is. Go to 1775coffee.com/studio and grab your starter kit before they're gone. Bold beans, clean fuel, and a morning routine that stands for something, just like Rumble does. Start your day with coffee that actually backs what you believe. All righty then. I'm going to check the chat real quick. Seems like everyone is doing A-okay. We are spam free, I believe. Congratulations, chat. People on Substack were having problems with Rumble. Yes, Rumble has been down today. I think it's back up. I think everybody in the Rumble chat's doing okay at this point. But if people are still having trouble, definitely let me know, just for my interest alone. Okay, so let's get to the International Crisis Group report. And before we do that, actually, let me see if I can find my Venezuela report from the Crisis Group. Everybody knows how much I love the International Crisis Group's report on Venezuela. All right, I'm going to have to go to the website version. Hold for processing. I've been pretty good the last few days about very few holds for processing. And I want to never have holds for processing, but that's not always possible. So this report, the one I'm going to show first, this Venezuela report, is from March of 2020. March 11th, 2020. And that happens to be the first official day of the very deadly pandemic. Probably a coincidence. So this is the Crisis Group's report. And I just want to focus before we go into their report on Trump's first 100 days. I want to see some of the people involved with the Crisis Group so you get an understanding of the background. So the chair, and this is as of 2020, Lord Mark Malloch Brown, President and CEO Robert Malley. He was involved with some of the Iran stuff during the fake and illegitimate Biden administration. Thomas Pickering, former Undersecretary of State and Ambassador to the UN. Wendy Sherman, another former Undersecretary of State. All of these people, establishment, regime-oriented. Alexander Soros, George Soros, Jake Sullivan, Lawrence Summers, William McRaven, and Alexander Downer, the Australian spy. You can go down this list and research every one of these people, and you will find similar globalist activity. President's Council includes BP, the gas company, Shearman and Sterling, White and Case, I guess 5 anonymous individuals, one Scott Bessent, who may be the world's greatest secret agent. And if we find that out, more power to him. Alexander Soros, you go down to the Advisory Council, Chevron, MetLife, HSBC, Noble Energy, Shell. You just keep going. Various philanthropists that we see popping up when we go to influencewatch.org to see who's funding all of these NGOs. And then you just go through a rogues gallery of globalists throughout. So this is an elite arm of the global elite. And they specifically involve themselves in international crises, as the name of the group would suggest. Now, the important part to remember is that they're the ones causing the international crises, not this group in particular necessarily, but the global regime and its various factions around the world, its former use of the U.S. military, UN peacekeeping forces, NATO, and then, of course, you have their private armies, the cartels, and the terrorist organizations. And so between all of that, it's quite easy to create crises all over the world. That's exactly what they do. And so you can scan their website for various civil wars and you will find out, oh, hey, how about that? They're involved on one side of this civil war. Who could have ever imagined? And it's always in a country that they're trying to split apart, or it's in the country that's already been split apart, like South Sudan, for instance. And I was just going through some of that the other day. It's going to be mentioned in the report here. But with that as a preface, and last thing, in that Venezuela report, the entire thing was a strategy to remove Nicolas Maduro as the leader of Venezuela by installing an election system there. They wanted new elections, and they wanted to elevate Juan Guaido, the fake president for a few years of Venezuela, who was not at any time a real president. You can see what the rest of the world is recognizing as legitimate in all these countries. And yet you still have people who say they're red-pilled, people who say they're awake, truthers, etc. He's a communist dictator, like cheering along, reposting Elon Musk as he's posting Maria Corina Machado, being like, look at these people out on the streets of Venezuela protesting against Nicolas Maduro's stolen election. Well, hey, dumbass, you're cheering for gangs and Black Lives Matter in Venezuela. I guess we're going to get stuck here forever, though. All right. To the PDF. Watch me not get through anywhere close to all of this today. So this was from April 29th. Wow. How about that? Sorry. In my screen, I see my main arrow, and then my main arrow, when it floats over the area on this PDF, it goes onto that too. And that is hopefully not going to be too distracting, but I imagine it might be. Trump's turbulent first 100 days, views from around the globe. First 100 days of President Donald Trump's second term in the White House will go down in history. Not since the Great Depression of the 1930s, when President Franklin Delano Roosevelt summoned the U.S. Congress for a special 100-day session, has a new administration attacked its first 3+ months in office with such ferocious commitment to rewiring the status quo. So, when we are told that Donald Trump has done nothing in his first 100 days or has done only bad things, that just ain't true. You could only see that they are bad if you inhabit this mindset. But the similarities end there. While Roosevelt's aim was to stabilize the United States in the wake of a financial catastrophe through institution building and legislative reform, the Trump administration is playing an entirely different game with different tools. Operating unilaterally through executive action, it seeks to upend a domestic and international political and legal order that it argues has served a narrow slice of the U.S. elite at the expense of the greater public. Proponents suggest it is a process of creative destruction. Creative destruction of the global regime, not creative destruction of the United States, just of the regime and the uniparty faction. Let us continue. Critics at home and abroad see only destruction. The chaotic annihilation of a system of laws, rules, safeguards, and values that they believe has, for all its imperfections, served the ends of peace, prosperity, and human flourishing. Ah, yes, it's just a matter of imperfections. It's not that the system is intended to produce exactly these outcomes. And of course, the system is intended to produce these outcomes. They just know that most people don't like these outcomes. So when it reaches a critical mass of people who don't approve of these outcomes, well, then they have to admit that they've made a mistake so that they seem like they are open and understanding to people's problems, which then suggests to people, hey, okay, I guess they've got this. They're going to try to make up for these terrible things they've been doing, but they're the ones in power. I have all this other stuff going on. I guess we should just leave them there. We'll give them another chance. And we've been going through our entire lives like that. While they have failed at absolutely everything, at least relative to the desires of the people. Of course, they've succeeded quite well in alignment with their own desires. They regard Trump's moves not as an reallocation of power to the U.S. citizenry, but as a corrupt play to consolidate power in himself, his family, and his cronies, as well as to exact revenge on his detractors. And the entire case hinges, as always, on that point. Do you think that Trump himself is the bad guy? Everything for 10 years has been focused on making Trump himself the bad guy, so that anything that touches or aligns with Donald Trump is similarly bad. And that is the cause of the Trump derangement, and it is what allows these people to keep on hanging on as they have. Trump himself is the bad guy. If you get over that and you don't believe he's a narcissist and you don't believe he's stupid and you don't believe he's doing all this just for himself and his own power, then immediately their entire case falls away. And that is what we are going to see throughout this report. And it's too bad that so many elites really still believe this stuff and keep disseminating it to people. Now, the people on the lower rungs, normal Americans who watch MSNBC and to some extent Fox News and the rest of the mainstream media and still believe many of these things, to me, that's just cruelty being inflicted upon them. They've been brainwashed. They've been hoodwinked too many times to count. They have too much going on in their own lives. Everything in their head is chaos because they live in a false reality. There is no God there. It's not a pleasant existence. But if you're an elite or you're a wannabe elite, you think you're smarter than Donald Trump. You think you're better than Donald Trump. You think you know better than Donald Trump based on your ability to memorize the entirety of the central narrative. And you assume Donald Trump doesn't even have the level of information that you have, despite being president and having the most exquisite possible access to information of anyone in the world. Okay? The elites believe all of this, that they are smarter, that they are better, that they are stronger, that they are wiser. And so that is what allows this perspective. And this perspective, of course, is immediately the death knell. You can't move on from this perspective. The longer you maintain this perspective, the stupider you become. Perhaps the greatest concern, both to the domestic opposition and to traditional U.S. allies overseas, for which Trump generally has little affection, is the question of whether U.S. institutional safeguards meant to check executive power and sustain the possibility of political renewal will hold. They held during Trump's first term, but it was a bumpy ride. And this time around, his team is both savvier and more determined to make indelible change. The situation is also a bit different on the world stage, where despite Washington's enormous power, other countries are already imposing meaningful costs on the administration as it rolls out its America First foreign policy. Are other countries imposing meaningful costs? No, they're not. From the perspective of the regime, they might be. But in reality, they're not. They might be trying to thwart Trump in every possible way. They might be refusing to even talk about his trade deals. And they're going to, we're going to tariff you. We're going to make the World Trade Organization punish you. Those aren't costs. Those are idle threats that don't matter. And if you carry through with them, will only accelerate the process. So by all means, carry through. Let us continue. And so I've highlighted a bunch of this. We're just going to skip to the highlights because this page, or this report, is 23 pages long. And I guess when it's all said and done, it's 21 pages long. But there's still a lot here. And so I'm going to try to hop around and hope that I can give you as complete a picture as possible in limited time. And actually, let me go ahead and check the chat real quick just to see how everybody's doing before we get started on this. Blue Demon 75, $10. Hit the like and share the show. Have a great weekend. Thank you very much, Blue Demon, not only for your support, your ongoing support, but also for having people hit the like and share the show. And honestly, sharing the show is the best way to get more people to understand these things. And I understand that doing a long show makes it very difficult to share. I wish that I had all the time and resources to be able to clip every single show. But, you know, I do the best I can. Thank you all very much for your continued support. Let us continue. If Roosevelt's legacy, what is called the New Deal, was a matrix of laws and institutions that shaped the modern socio-political order in the United States, the legacy toward which Trump has been driving is one that pushes past mere executive aggrandizement toward a system in which democratic choice might be preserved, but that tilts inexorably toward the incumbent party. At one federal agency, U.S. officials were told that the administration's tolerance for legal risk is 100%, suggesting that the rule of law will not be allowed to impede the president's agenda. It was no idle comment, as the administration's record to date has made clear. So those are two big sentences for one paragraph. They admit that democratic choice might persist, but our democracy is said to be collapsing. So our democracy and democratic choice are not the same thing, quite clearly. So democratic choice might still exist, which means that the people will get their say. That's what that means. Democracy doesn't have to be a bad word, okay? I mean, we've all been educated into believing that democracy is the worst system of all time. All of the democratic republics around the world and the democracies around the world are regime-oriented or communist. So democracy has become a bad word. But democracy, small d, theoretically, just means that the people get to choose. So if the people can still choose, but our democracy collapses, well, that must mean elections or some other kind of direct input into the system. And maybe that's achievable with blockchain, something built on top of Bitcoin that might have a verifiable and irrefutable sound ledger so that people's actual opinions can be tracked. Then it's a focus on what people's opinions are going to be and on what people actually want. I have theorized many times that our technology can already allow for something like that now, not with people directly voting, but people's expressions and desires online and whatever their phone is listening to, whatever they put in social media, the places they go, the money they spend, etc. They have such an intricate web of information about each and every one of us. They, of course, also know our political opinions and where we would go. So if that is being read responsibly, analyzed responsibly, and implemented, and I've theorized before that that is exactly how Trump is being guided, then that is already a democracy, a pure democracy. Okay. And again, in that scenario, playing at the speed of the television means we're going to continue getting the regime's outcomes dictated and disseminated through the television. All right. That's the price we pay for truthing that way. It's not truthing, guys. It's not truthing. And it's especially not truthing when the people disseminating it are like pathological liars and you can see it. But hey, to each his own. Second sentence here, another really interesting one. At one federal agency, U.S. officials, the legal tolerance for legal risk, the administration's tolerance for legal risk is 100%, right? They don't care what the rules, the statutes, the regulations, court precedent, and the norms are. They only care what the Constitution is. This is something I've been talking about for years now. We can see it playing out in reality. We can see it in this understanding of what's happening. The tolerance for legal risk is 100%. They're going to do what they want and make the courts stop them, relying only on the Constitution. Okay? We are seeing the system for some things temporarily that the Trump administration is doing. We are seeing the lawfare apparatus temporarily thwart some of the things the Trump administration is doing, but we're not seeing the Constitution thwart the things that Trump is doing. And none of the things he's doing are just on their face, obviously unconstitutional. And the people's perspective on what the original Constitution says is ultimately the only thing that's supposed to matter in our society. So if we're like, here's the Constitution, I'm reading it, what Trump is doing doesn't seem to violate this, that's it. And then if everybody agrees, that's the decision. That's what gives the courts legitimacy. That is the final authority. The states can pull back their delegation of power from the federal government. The people can pull back their delegation of power to the states. That's how the system's supposed to work. Okay. So legal risk, of course. Yeah. Let it be 100%. You're not going to deter them, get them to just thwart themselves because of your norms. It's preposterous. Jumping down. The administration is also rewriting the playbook for how the government can bend private institutions to its will. And they go through with some of the law firms. They go through with Harvard University. They're going to go after the law firms. They're going to remove funding. They're going to remove security clearances. They're going to make it so they can no longer get government contracts. They're taking the funding away from Harvard and making it rely on its like $50 billion endowment to be able to educate people. Maybe they're not going to have so many foreign students. Maybe they're not going to be teaching so many communists. It'd be wonderful if they all shut down, but I don't think that that's true. And then there's people with like nostalgic need to have universities and particularly these premier institutions survive. What would we do without Harvard? Well, we would just go on with our lives. Skipping down again. The steepness of the country's authoritarian slide will depend on the untested strength of certain safeguards in this new climate and the resiliency of opposition in the face of heightened risk. The resiliency of the opposition. They need all hands on deck all the time, all resources committed. Still unresolved are questions about how hard the Supreme Court will push back at Trump on a range of issues, whether the administration will defy the justices, whether the economic consequences of the trade war will loosen Trump's hold on the Republican Party, whether the 2026 midterm elections will bring to power a Democrat majority in at least one House of Congress, and whether the country's highly local election systems will foil any effort to improperly influence the 2028 presidential contest. So that is them saying, as long as the other side doesn't cheat, we just need to get back one house of the Congress so Trump can't implement his agenda. What part of Trump's agenda has been implemented so far? I guess they passed the Lake and Riley Act or something. And maybe we'll get the big, beautiful bill one day. But there's no agenda that requires the Congress or the Senate. Do we need the confirmations from the Senate? Really? We need confirmation so that people can disseminate the messages of what the executive branch is doing. As I suggested the other day, we're probably already under military government. It's all so silly. Let's continue. Boil it down, and the key question is whether the country can retain its capacity for political renewal. While there continues to be a huge amount of opposition activity, and polls show Trump rapidly losing popularity, other signs are worrying. Oh, you mean the real signs, not the astroturfed opposition activist op that you're running and organizing and funding, and not the fake news polls. It's just the other signs that are worrying. Got it. Following Trump's electoral loss in 2020, he mounted a concerted attempt to overturn the result and subvert the peaceful transfer of power. He paid no price for his transgressions. Well, that is awfully bold, globalists. Trump attempted to overturn the results of a legitimate election. No, he didn't. The election was quite obviously the most rigged and stolen and ridiculous election we've ever had. It was comically rigged. 158 million votes. Joe Biden, 81 million votes from his basement. Give me a break. Nobody believes that shit. Thwarting the peaceful transfer of power. He didn't do that. And of course, then they have to point to the very violent insurrection, which is itself an op. And he paid no price. So they wanted him to go to prison. All the indictments were real. All of them should have gone through and found Trump guilty. And now he should be serving 700 years in prison and all their problems would be solved. Nice wish casting commies. What he might do to retain power for himself or an heir apparent is not yet clear. But the idea that he will behave according to the conventional rules and norms that govern U.S. elections seems fanciful. You're speaking my language, guys. I hope that's true. I have no attachment whatsoever to our fake elections. If we do not have elections in 2026, if we do not have elections in 2028, I will not care at all. Who will care? People whose entire political analysis revolves around forcing people into corners under threat of not having your special people elected. And what it really is under threat of you not having the television tell you that your special people were elected. And a lot of people are focused entirely on that. And of course, elections are big business, and they're the only way for the regime to ever even psyop us into believing that anyone wants them in power. So they need elections. Why then would I care about elections? Elections are fake. The Congress is illegitimate. Our state governments, our local governments are illegitimate. It's all illegitimate. The sooner we get to the point of recognition, the sooner we can move on from this. Obviously, the plan is bigger than figuring out how to win the 2026 midterms. So when people are analyzing politics through the lens of elections and midterm elections, stop listening. I mean, do whatever you want, but sooner or later, doesn't matter how much you like them, doesn't matter how much you think they're on the right page, they missed the boat. The boat's not coming back. The boat is already way down there. You can wait on the dock forever because you're like, this is my favorite boat. I got to stay on this boat. Gonna miss it. Let us continue. Trump abroad. Trump's disdain for playing by the rules is also on display internationally, where domestic law places fewer constraints on what the U.S. president can do, but where there are other potentially more formidable checks on overreach, namely other countries. So the global regime aligned countries have to join hands with the opposition in America to thwart the Trump administration and anything the United States president might want to do. So again, it comes down to a question, leverage against leverage, good twin, evil twin, worldwide, the push and pull, the tug of war over who's going to be in control. And they admit it. That is what they are saying. It is not that the U.S. lacks friends. Its traditional allies in Europe and around the Pacific Rim have been an enormous asset to U.S. influence and power projection. But the new administration tends to see them as freeloading at best and hostile to its agenda at worst. There's a sense in which the latter is true. Okay, they are hostile. They say Washington's closest friends are invested in the international system of laws, institutions, and alliances that the U.S. helped build over the decades following World War II, and which the Trump administration now sees as hindering the pursuit of its interests. Few will want any part of the administration's efforts to dismantle that system. Few will want any part. It's not few, it's many. We can already see many countries going away from that system. And it's not only that we see many countries, it's that we see the most powerful countries in the world going away from that system. In Africa, in South America, in Asia, not so much in Europe yet, and not, at least as far as we know, so much in North America. Everywhere else, in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, on our side are the regimes, our side. Brazil, Venezuela, our side. Argentina, our side. El Salvador, our side. You just keep going down the list. Go to Asia. Russia, China, India, all opposing the global regime and its agenda to some degree. All the most powerful countries in the world are lined up against that regime. They are so Eurocentric in their thinking, and they are so confident in the countries and factions that they've bought out around the world that they can actually convince themselves to believe that only few countries are going to want to align with Donald Trump. Lee Walden, $2 in the chat. You're a good man, Charlie Brown, in the words of the Peanut Gallery. Well, thank you very much. I'm just going to skip through this paragraph. They go on talking about Greenland, Denmark, Panama Canal, Canada, Gaza. So all of the major global issues that are kind of the hot button issues right now. The report states they are already considering how to make up for a potential U.S.-sized hole in their defense postures, referring to the old alliances and security partnerships. Then there are the tariffs. Trump's Liberation Day tariffs, announced on the 2nd of April, reflected a big bet that the U.S. could leverage its huge market to rejigger the global economic order, binning the old values-based partnerships and alliances that in Trump's view have shackled U.S. potential. So they're going to reset the global economic order, which is exactly what we've been talking about. And also then you always have to remember that the other side of that is the Great Reset. The resetting of the world's economic order was going to happen one way or another, or the entire Great Reset and everything that touches it is an opposition counter narrative to all of this. All of that would be them then understanding that this plan to reset the global economic order in a sovereign and multipolar fashion would be the main plan, and the Great Reset plan, the World Economic Forum and the rest of it, would be the response to make sure that the people of the world don't want any sort of reset to happen, to make them committed to things as they have always been. And so if that's the case, then you might throw someone like Klaus Schwab out there, who's just so obviously a comic book villain that he makes the entire project look terrible. And I'm not saying that they're the same project. I'm saying that they are attempting to hijack the central plan. We often talk about it in the other way around. Or someone like Yuval Noah Harari talking about useless eaters. It's a very effective controlled opposition counter narrative op relative to the multipolar sovereign world order that's emerging, that maybe they get people to reject it. So that could be the attempt. I think it's worth at least considering. Here is the cockiness from the International Crisis Group. They say none of it seems to be working out. Perhaps the biggest headache for the administration is that in China, it has chosen an adversary that has the motive, resources, and political discipline to stare down its U.S. counterpart. Plus, China's enormous holdings of U.S. debt and its control of exports needed for strategic industries allow it to inflict considerable discomfort on the U.S. How long the administration can stand the pain it brings upon itself as it pursues its global trade war is unclear. And again, I would suggest that we are not actually facing too much discomfort at this point. And I'm not sure that we're going to in the future either. Trump and Xi had a deal worked out, and then the very deadly pandemic happened. And there's no way that that deal is just going to be re-implemented with China, even though Trump's totally saying, I think he had one this morning. Let me just pull this up quickly. I don't want to misquote it. He said on Truth Social, China should open up its market to USA. Would be so good for them, with a bunch of exclamation points. Closed markets don't work anymore, and more exclamation points. So he wants something to work out with China just fine. And it's probably just going to be the deal that he had before. And so then the only question would be, how do you view what has happened in the interim? And was that deal already in place, and has it been in place the entire time? And we're just slow to realize. Let's continue. Are there diplomatic advantages to Trump's iconoclasm? Possibly. They say the administration's orthodoxy, its readiness to talk directly to U.S. adversaries, its purported disinclination to pour U.S. lives and treasure into military adventurism, and its desire to extract the country from strategic quagmires may create openings. So as the U.S. withdraws some of this globalist-oriented support, apparatus, presence, influence, etc., as some of that is withdrawn, maybe there are chances for the global regime to grasp back power in different ways in the gaps. They say perhaps most consequentially, it has interposed itself as a mediator between Ukraine and its European backers. on one hand, and Russia on the other. But Ukraine and its European backers. I thought Trump was just negotiating between Russia and Ukraine. I thought the war was between Russia and Ukraine. And here we're being told that it's Ukraine and its European backers. That is just the regime protecting one of its regime proxy states. They're saying it in terms that couldn't be clearer. On one side of the negotiations are Ukraine and its European backers, and on the other side is Russia. And Russia has backers that are not European. Russia has backers that have actual power, whose militaries are far bigger than anything in Europe, because Europe's got virtually nothing. That was just the US military protecting them, the global system at large. Maybe they still have the terrorist organizations and the cartels. But of course, the terrorist organizations and cartels are being cleaned up all over the world. That's what we're seeing throughout this process, or at least what we're being told is happening throughout this process. Ukraine and its European backers. Right there. The Right Secretary of State Marco Rubio and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz do not always appear to have Trump's full confidence. And they wrote this article a day or two before Mike Waltz was moved out of his position as National Security Advisor. They are still relatively happy throughout this report with Marco Rubio, who they consider a traditionalist, someone from the establishment, the sort of guy they can work with, the sort of guy who understands the importance of what they've built. By all appearances, it also has instincts, this being the Trump administration, if not precise clarity, about what it would like to replace this system with, a more transactional one where the U.S. is freer to throw its weight around. So a free market, is that what that is? Transactions where one has leverage and the other has a different amount of leverage, and the one with more leverage will come out ahead unless they choose to be fair with the other partner. And then the relationship and the bond forms because they're like, oh, we can do, these people are good to us, right? They're definitely more powerful, but they're good to us. That's a better situation. And that's exactly the situation we're talking about here. They try to make it look like Trump just wants all this power to bully all these other nations. Has anyone ever gotten any indication from Donald Trump that he wants to bully these other nations? I mean, they talk about Greenland. He's going to go invade Greenland. He's going to steal Greenland. The people don't want it. We took a poll. The Panama Canal, he's just going to bully them. He's bullying Canada. Give me a break. Let's continue. Nor does the Trump administration seem fully prepared for how its allies and partners will respond to its aggressive unilateralism, with Canada's election offering a portrait of how opposition to Trump might galvanize political currents elsewhere. Well, good luck on that, commies. It does not seem like the Mark Carney thing is going to get you a stalwart regime supporter willing to take on Donald Trump. They had a very cordial and friendly visit, and Trump said many times right in front of Carney that Canada should be the 51st state. They get a better deal. They get free military support. What deal could be better than that? Let us continue back to the report here. A further question is whether the administration is fully ready for the consequences of upending the core tenets of post-World War II international order. Well, yes, that's exactly what we want. A world in which stronger states feel fewer restraints on invading weaker neighbors and changing borders by force is recipe for global bedlam. They literally overthrow governments. They were trying to overthrow Venezuela in one of the reports on their own website. Okay. The idea that military force is the only kind of force is one of the foundational understandings that they rely on to make these sorts of points but it's not actually true. There are other kinds of force, like stealing elections and waging information warfare and psychological warfare and economic warfare, all of which they do. We've talked about these things a million times at this point. Control over media, control over finance, control over resources, control over trade routes, control over militaries. That's the global regime apparatus. It is all too plausible that states might begin to nuclearize. Come on. Either because they can no longer rely on the U.S. security umbrella or because they actively fear a marauding U.S. might pose an existential threat. Ridiculous. This possibility is hard to square with the ambitions of an administration that seems understandably squeamish about proliferation. Well, no, it's not. The nuke thing's just not going to happen. So you can be against proliferation and just not accept that there is any worry whatsoever that these countries are going to get nuclear weapons. We were just told like 2 months ago that the UK doesn't even have like an ability to wield its so-called nuclear arsenal. The whole thing is a clown show. The old order was changing before Trump came in, and it is changing faster now. I thought that was very interesting. The strength of U.S. security guarantees comes less from there being an ironclad promise than from the belief that Washington would defend its allies if necessary, a belief that Trump's statements erode, even if so far he has not pulled out of alliances. The foundational norms of the old order, those meant to prevent war and mitigate the suffering of those caught up in it, were too often honored in the breach, but are almost daily shaken by Trump's words, if not his deeds. They are in danger of being tossed wholly overboard. If there is a possible upside, it is that the teetering of markets, the threat of nuclearization, and a dawning awareness that the world's nations are more difficult to manipulate than domestic political elements could still have a tempering effect on the new administration's appetite for further destruction of an order that does not yet have a viable replacement. Does it have a viable replacement? The question first has to be, is that world order necessary? Is the system of trade necessary? I'd say probably not. I think that countries are probably going to get through it. Certainly, the regime's media and governance and global organization are not necessary. And if we can't get certain products for some amount of time and we have problems with supply chains or whatever, like I'm on the page where it's just so be it. All right. We can figure out how to live without various things. We're the most resource rich and innovative people in the world. We can just figure it out. All right. What if we don't have toilet paper? Well, I guess we're just going to have to get people here to make toilet paper real fast. And I bet we can do it. And I bet this stuff is already, as we've seen, the re-onshoring of manufacturing, that's a big component in this. It's been going on for years. This is so ridiculous. They're like, you need our system. You would die without it. No, we won't. And here are the threats, right? The teetering of markets, threat of nuclearization, dawning awareness that the world's nations are more difficult to manipulate than domestic political elements. No, they're not. None of that is real. Those are just paper tigers that the regime throws up, and I guess they still believe it, and that still works internally in their cordoned off conversations. But why would anybody believe that nonsense? Africa. So Africa, things are changing rapidly in Africa. We talked, 2 years ago plus, about how a land bridge was building from east to west across Central Africa, the region that they call the Sahel. There were all sorts of global regime programs for this region, but those countries are kicking the global regime out, and they are removing the European colonizers and the U.S. security apparatus and replacing it with Russia and China. So you can think that's bad if you want, but either way, it's moving away from the regime. The relaxed attitudes in Africa toward Trump's return to the White House were based on experiences during his first term when he exercised an interest-driven transactionalism that some welcomed. Few anticipated that the do-over would bring a much more ideological approach, overturning decades of bipartisan support for humanitarian and development assistance on the continent. And this is very much in line with USAID, who they mention in the next paragraph there. Interesting, isn't it? They thought that Trump could work with them on certain things in the first term. Then, of course, Biden kept those in place, but didn't make any progress just because he couldn't. And now Trump's going a different direction. So it's almost like he hoodwinked them in the first term. And that is the sort of pattern that we should see repeating over and over and over again. And then understand that how things were and the things that Trump might have said that he supported or whatever are not going to be that way forever, which is, again, one of the really annoying things about the whole Trump said or this said or whatever that we still see being played out. Trump says conflicting things all the time. And again, just to make clear for anybody who's watching for the first time, I'm not suggesting that Trump is lying as he does that. Trump manipulates narratives. He forces a public conversation. Trump is the single biggest catalyst to truth that this world has probably seen in 2,000 years. Let us continue. So they mention Project 2025 and say it called for a shift away from standalone development, humanitarian aid, and toward fostering free market systems, arguing that the old assistance model had failed, but few, if any, foresaw the brutal way in which the recommendation would be followed. The Trump administration brought a giant axe rather than a scalpel to the task of reform. Again, very interesting. They want to foster free market systems. What do we have now? A global welfare state where money that is pinned to the blood and the labor of the American people provides welfare for all these other countries to build them up in the image of the global regime. And that's going to go away. So countries will then have to become self-sufficient, hopefully with a little support so that they don't collapse. And then they will actually come into the world of equal relationships, bilateral relationships, trade relationships, etc. It's an entirely different model for the world, one that doesn't require the global welfare state, one that doesn't require the top-down centralized control system. In Sudan, where a vicious civil war has spawned the world's worst humanitarian crisis, kitchens feeding the hungry saw their funding vanish overnight. Dozens of children have reportedly died of starvation in the weeks since the funding cuts were instituted. And of course, you have to pull the heartstrings. These steps will cause inevitable harm to U.S. prestige. There is no doubt that the aid system needed reform. And so again, they admit, yes, sure, there were problems. They can't deny them, of course, because everyone has begun to discover and find out about all the problems and all the NGOs and how the system actually works. So they have to admit it, but they need to keep moving. Where do we stop? There we are. There's no doubt the aid system needed reform, as several African leaders have been quick to point out. But the sudden, seemingly cavalier manner of USAID's shuttering scarcely resembled the actions of a responsible major power. As the Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz remarked, "What kind of country does this?" Give me a break. I mean, honestly, that is so ridiculous. And also, why would the African leaders be so quick to point out that the system needed reform if the global welfare state system was actually fixing things? No African country so far has been invited to negotiate down the steep tariffs Trump announced on the 2nd of April. And if rolled out on schedule, the import taxes could cost thousands of jobs and, according to an assessment by the International Monetary Fund, lead to a significant decline in economic growth on the continent. Or it could just be an economic boon to every country that rejects the global order and begins to live in a self-sufficient manner. I guess we'll have to see. As far as negotiations go, Maybe that's going to happen. Maybe that's not going to happen. Maybe they're having their needs met elsewhere, and that's okay. For all its domestic governance failings, South Africa's African National Congress has a storied history that most on the continent greatly admire. It is seen as the symbol of what many view as the heroic struggle to end apartheid. And I think that if you have paid any attention to that issue, that framing now looks ridiculous. Possibly influenced by white South African donors and advisors around him, Trump has propounded a false claim that white South African farmers face genocide. So it's just false. It's just made up. Trump's making it up. Trump's just saying it because rich white South Africans are telling him to say it. And we're just supposed to accept that. And of course, people who are under the sway of this sort of agenda and this sort of presentation will totally accept it. These moves have not gone down well with many on the continent, where they are perceived as racially driven and as blowback for South Africa's case against Israel's government at the International Court of Justice. Now, the International Court of Justice doesn't matter at all. So this is not blowback for South Africa's case against Israel. That's preposterous. It's also not racially driven. It might just be that they actually believe that the global regime is doing the same things it does everywhere. These moves have not gone down well with many on the continent. That part is very much like the Kristen Welker approach in the interview that we went over on Monday. They're saying, I've found a bunch of examples that don't like what Trump is doing. We're going to pretend that these examples constitute some sort of majority or consensus opinion. That is not true at all, or the regime and its proxies and its colonizing European countries wouldn't have been kicked out of there over the last few years. As for other areas of Africa policy, the administration's attention has generally been scattered or non-existent, not least because key positions such as that of Assistant Secretary of State for Africa are not yet filled. In the absence of new policy direction, there has been a significant degree of continuity with Biden-era policies. A significant degree of continuity with Biden-era policies. How about that? And what about those Biden-era policies?
President in 2024.
One believes President Biden.
One believes? You one of those non-believers that the election, the American people didn't vote?
One believes it was President Biden, but somehow President Biden was implementing Donald Trump's policies the whole time. Why would President Biden do that? Crazy. If only there was one lone group in the entire world actually analyzing that. The administration's words and actions outside Africa also cast a shadow over the continent. The abrogation of norms, including threats to change borders by force, could be seen as a green light for others to take liberties toward a harsh new reality. Does the foregoing mean that African elites see the Trump transition in the same tectonic terms as their European or Asian counterparts? Not necessarily. There's precious little nostalgia for the pre-Trump era on the continent. In recent years, the West's reputation has taken a battering amid perceptions of double standards and a revolt against what some see as sanctimonious moralizing by Western officials. There is precious little nostalgia for the pre-Trump era on the continent. So doesn't that conflict with the thing you just said about how many on the continent agree with you? Few sound the notes of emergency audible among those watching the Trump administration from Washington or Brussels. And so it is the establishment, it is the regime that is making a big deal out of how their project in Africa is failing. Skipping down, statesmen, such as Tanzania's Julius Nyerere and Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah, championed a stronger organization of African unity, the precursor to the African Union, or AU, speaking with a unified voice on the global stage and taking a proactive stance in forging peace deals. So if you are aligned with the regime, then you're a statesman and you're the one voicing this important support. At home, the virtual termination of USAID programming offers both the need and opportunity for a rethink on how to make African economies more competitive, less dependent, and more equitable, given that many countries have considerable resources flowing primarily to the elite. That's your system set up where the resources are flowing to the elite. You have the welfare state to take care of everybody else because they've been completely and totally impoverished. So now the global regime, to maintain any influence in these regions and their access to the natural resources of these countries, well, they're going to have to change their deal with these countries. And maybe these countries might hold out for better deals, thus improving their situation because they have Russia and China behind them. None of the above means that the Trump administration's sudden withdrawal of assistance was justified. Making the cuts without prior notice displayed a callous bent that many around the world are struggling to adjust to. And once again, we have the Trump is bad explanation. Still, it is the harsh new reality African leaders must contend with, waking up to a world in which they will have far less external support. They will have to show greater responsibility for their citizens and use domestic resources more prudently. It's amazing. It's amazing that they keep up the pretense that somehow all of these nations around the world that they control or that are controlled through their influence were just making their own decisions the whole time. And now they're going to have to be independent, or even more independent, I should say. All right, different camps, different approaches. So they're talking about how there are these different factions within the Trump administration. They're right. Sitting above it all is Trump himself, but he too seems pulled in different directions by his own contradictory impulses. Wanting to both seize the economic upper hand with Beijing by launching an ill-considered trade war that's working out just fine, and to collaborate with it in fashioning a new political and economic order that would have Washington and Beijing as a de facto G2 at the center. Well, wait a second. That can't be. He has totally contradictory impulses. He's waging a trade war that's certainly going to backfire, and China has all the power. But he also wants to collaborate with China on a new political and economic order. What if it's just the second and he's just collaborating with China, with Russia, and with all these other countries on a new political and economic order? You know, I mean, just think about it, guys, at the International Crisis Group for a second. You keep saying that Trump wants to upend the political and economic order that exists. That's what this is. Why not just recognize that, and then we can dispense with the ideas about the ill-considered trade war that was probably ended 5 years ago? These people are crazy. Let us continue. I'm hoping that I can get through all this, but I really don't know if that's going to be possible. A failure to cohere. At first, it appeared Trump's vision of a de facto G2 might drive his administration's policy. We're going to skip ahead. He invited his counterpart to Xi Jinping to attend his inauguration, and he declared that the U.S. and China could together solve all the problems of the world. Some observers worried then and fret still that Trump might use this leader-level diplomacy to trade away Taiwan's security for a new economic relationship with China, a grand bargain that could tempt China to attack the island. Well, China's not going to have to attack the island. Taiwan will just become part of China. Taiwan is already recognized by the US as being part of China. So if we give Taiwan to China, we can reset the economic order. Well, what if, understanding that Taiwan is already part of China and that it is just a global proxy state, a satellite to China to control and threaten China the same way that Ukraine was next to Russia? If we understand that, well, we can just wipe off that side of the equation and focus on the relationship. Sorry, I wanted to pull the document back up. The economic relationship between the US and China, leader level diplomacy. They don't want leader level diplomacy. On what other level does diplomacy operate? This is why I love reading these things. This is the cheat code. Okay. They tell you the contours of the system. And so all you have to do is listen to what they're saying, understand that they are inverting their language and making terrible things sound appealing and appealing things sound terrible. And it's much easier to parse. In late March, Hegseth announced that the US and Japan would accelerate efforts to establish a joint military command. Around the same time, the Washington Post reported that he had authored an interim planning document calling China the Pentagon's sole-pacing threat and declaring that, quote, denial of a Chinese fait accompli seizure of Taiwan is its sole-pacing scenario. So that's some sort of big priority, according to reporting from the Washington Post. Except that's not a priority, and it's just going to happen. Washington's Asian friends are doubtless also watching with concern as he, Trump, undertakes to wrest Greenland away from Denmark and to make Canada the 51st U.S. state. So they're getting worried that Taiwan is not going to be their proxy state anymore. To allies and partners, the tariffs risked signaling that Trump is loyal to little beyond his own balance sheet. To developed countries like Vietnam and Bangladesh, where manufacturing is a major source of employment, the tariffs pose the threat of economic collapse and supplied a reason to draw closer to Beijing. So regional powers are beginning to have closer relationships with the countries around them, trade relationships, so that they will supply one another with the things that they need. One country has one thing, one country doesn't have that thing, but has another thing. And so they trade. That's how a free market would work. That's how a normal world would work. It is just an opposition to a top-down centralized control system. And they can't tolerate that. But regional powers having better relationships with the smaller countries of the region is entirely sensible, especially if you want a more stable world. The problem, they say, is that neither Trump nor Xi seems prepared to blink. Well, neither of them have to because it's already settled. Trump may have more room to pivot should he choose to do so. His base is deeply loyal and accustomed to his turning on a dime when politically expedient, but he clearly wants to be seen as cutting a deal from a position of strength. That is going to be a tall order. China's leadership appears to believe that Trump has overplayed his hand. Appears to believe. It has openly contradicted Trump's assertions that negotiations are underway, and it shows no inclination to be seen as caving. Finding an off-ramp that allows both sides to save face will require skillful diplomacy. Yet comments like Vance's remark that the U.S., quote, borrows money from Chinese peasants to buy the things those Chinese peasants manufacture can only set back that effort. Now, I doubt those comments are going to set back any effort. They're not going to have any effect at all. The situation's already settled. Comments also happen to be, I mean, maybe not the best way of saying it, but correct. We fund China by buying cheap Chinese manufactured goods that are produced by slave labor. One U.S. relationship that seems fairly unperturbed is that with India, Trump enjoys good personal chemistry with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Now, that must have been very hard for them to write because, of course, India is critical. While neither Tokyo nor Seoul seems ready to take the most consequential step, moving toward nuclearization, both governments are struggling with a loss of confidence in U.S. deterrence. So the evil twin faction in these countries, South Korea and Japan, are concerned that the United States will not be protecting them anymore. Now, South Korea is a proxy state of the global regime. And at this point, you got to think Japan is too. We essentially made it so Japan could not have a military after World War II and have been there ever since. The Korean War has never ended. And South Korea is only a U.S. military governed proxy state that is dependent on the U.S. government. So again, if the United States relinquishes some of that control, it seems obvious then that they're going to have to shift their leverage relationship with China, the actual regional power. As a number of Asian democracies head toward the polls over the course of 2025, for the first time, the issue of U.S. unpredictability is a bigger election issue than the known threat from China. So they don't care that much about the threat of China relative to the U.S. pulling away. Well, the U.S. pulling away means the media is going to convince everybody that the country's going to fall apart. The regime still needs power. You can't choose these bad people that are going to be closer to China. And that would, of course, be the exact wrong advice unless you were trying to keep the top-down centralized control system in place, which, of course, is exactly what they're doing. Europe, mid-pivot mediation. I'm going to take a second, take a drink of water, check the chat. I hope everybody's doing okay. I hope it's not terrible to do these kind of long form sorts of things. Polymath Anon says ripping and tearing, so good enough. Nice little crowd over on Substack as well. People are starting to, I think, become more accustomed to watching live streams over there, which is cool. All right. So again, just going to hit the highlighted parts. Hopefully we can power through a good chunk of the rest of this. Given the importance of U.S. material and intelligence support for Ukraine's fight, would he use his leverage to force a deal that would spell the end of its sovereignty? Not quite, but the Trump administration has moved the U.S. into a role that would have been unfathomable to any other modern U.S. president, sitting between Moscow on one side and Kyiv and its European backers on the other. As the administration steps away from European allies, it remains to be seen whether Trump's parting gift will be a settlement of the war in Ukraine. As it steps away from European allies, it remains to be seen whether he'll be able to settle the war. And I would say that the settlement of the war is going to be just fine. The war. And this is a bunch of nonsense scaremongering. Regardless of when and how the war may end, most European states anticipate that they will need to continue fending off Moscow. Land grabs may not be the most likely scenario, but Russia certainly has the tools and tradecraft to attack European economies and political systems. Well, that's exactly what they did to Russia. So first of all, it would be warranted. But second of all, there's no real indication that they're going to do that, although they might use their leverage considering they supply resources and energy to like half of Europe. It's incredible. I mean, I'm amazed by these people. Land grabs, also that part is key. Land grabs may not be the most likely scenario. So Russia's not actually going to go through all of Europe trying to take over all of those European countries. That's not going to happen. There was some writing on the wall, and European officials expected U.S. support for both warfighting in Ukraine and their own security needs to decrease with Trump coming back to office, but they were nonetheless unprepared for just how jarring Trump's first 100 days would be. For Trump and his inner circle, the war in Ukraine is a foolish adventure. Trump has repeatedly and erroneously stated that Zelensky started the war. And of course, Zelensky didn't start the war, but the global regime did. He also blames President Barack Obama for insufficiently arming Ukraine following Russia's 2014 invasion. Ha! Russia invaded in 2014 too, without firing a shot. Oh, you mean when Barack Obama ceded Crimea to Russia? That's an invasion? Or are they talking about the ethnic civil war that the global regime and its Ukrainian Nazis began waging in the Donbass that Russia then responded to because those are ethnic Russians who speak Russian? President Biden, this is Trump blaming President Biden for supposedly being too weak to deter Russia's massive escalation in 2022, and the European allies who have continued to support Ukraine for prolonging the conflict past the time when it should have stopped. And again, that's quite clear. It continues on because they keep wanting it to continue on, or at least that's the surface level public narrative that we have access to. Let us continue. Trump advisors are unconvinced that Moscow poses a particular threat to European security, or if it does, that Europe is particularly important to the US. And it works either way. And the truth is, they don't really pose a threat, except to the extent that Europe wants to continue supporting the top-down centralized control system and using whatever influence remains to harm Russia. Nor does the Trump team seem to believe that Washington's past strategy of trying to demonize Russia as an aggressive revisionist power has met with much success. Instead, at least some argue, it has motivated Russian President Vladimir Putin to assert himself with increasing boldness, while much of the world, including elements of Trump world, shrugs at his transgressions. Things might go better, the argument goes, if the U.S. treated Putin with greater respect, brought him back into the mainstream of global politics, and looked to collaborate with him on commercial opportunities. And all of these things are things that are already in motion. And again, they recognize over and over that the economic order is faltering, that they're not going to get the results that they want in Ukraine or Taiwan or these other places. They talk about Trump wanting to build partnerships with these countries. They might as well just start calling it the Sovereign Alliance. It would be better if they just started saying, we oppose the Sovereign Alliance, as my friend Burning Bright calls it. Sovereign Alliance is a good term, but the multipolar world order, however we want to think of it, I'm not even sure it's an alliance. That's the only reason I'm hesitant on his term sometimes, because I'm not sure if it's an alliance. It might just be a tacit agreement to both oppose that thing and not interfere with one another. Not sure that quite goes up to the idea of an alliance. And then to apply that to all the countries at once being an alliance, I also don't think it has to work that way either. So that is, a mild opposition to what I think is a pretty good term, but I think it's important to parse those other elements as well. So they're talking about the proposal for the end of the Russia-Ukraine quote unquote war. Some of the terms, particularly the notion that the U.S. legitimate Russia's conquest of Crimea, which is already fait accompli. That's a done deal. That's been a done deal for 11 years. But the idea that would set terrible precedents, contravening international law and resonating all too much with the administration's own expansionist rhetoric. Any of the unresolved questions the proposal brushes away could well become a deal killer. Well, only in the minds of the European backers and in no one else's minds, because the international laws don't matter. There's no such thing ultimately as international laws unless you have a top-down system of control. So international laws don't matter. Crimea is already part of Russia. It's going to be recognized as part of Russia. And whatever else occurs, whatever the response is just what it will be. It doesn't matter. But for all these questions, gaps, and problems that were reported, the proposal was, and likely still is, at bottom, good news. To the extent the Trump team was indeed able to gain Russian agreement to a cessation of hostilities along present lines of contact, something the Kremlin had previously said was anathema, then Moscow was showing itself to be more malleable than previously expected and suggesting that this White House indeed has the capacity to obtain results, or at least make it look like that way. Dumb commies. Zelensky, and of course they have the capacity to obtain results. I'm not suggesting that. They just mean obtain results on behalf of the regime and its interests. Zelensky reiterated his willingness to embrace a full ceasefire and then commence talks, while Kyiv and its European friends responded to the U.S. offer with a counteroffer, which, among other things, would commit the U.S. to a collective security guarantee for Ukraine, permit Ukraine's backers to deploy troops in the country, condition U.S. sanctions easing on attainment of peace, and renounce restrictions on the Ukrainian armed forces. But you're not going to get it. That's the thing. So they go through some of Zelensky's willingness to deal, his reasoning behind that. And right, this is true notwithstanding the risk that Russia will try to pocket favorable terms that have been proffered without making its own concessions, something the U.S. will have to resist if it wants an actual deal, and profound anxiety on the part of critics that say Trump is on his way to throwing the game to Putin. Well, no, he's not. To the extent that there is a war, it is being won exclusively by Russia and has been the entire time. Russia has all the leverage. Ukraine has zero leverage. It's just a matter of how long the regime will keep the whole thing going. That's it. Besides that, Russia has all the leverage. So Russia's not going to make any concessions. They're not going to give you the Donbass back. None of that's going to happen. It sounds like they are attempting to negotiate through very ineffective means. But let's continue. While there is no reason for Kyiv to accept the U.S. proposed deal in its present form, it should take Putin up on his offer for bilateral talks without preconditions, whether the U.S. backs away or not. Kyiv should come into these talks just as it has gone into talks with the U.S., with its European friends, though not in the room, at its back, having together defined positions, red lines, sticks, and carrots. So it wants the U.S. and the European allies at the backs of the Ukrainians, but of course they're going to lead. Offering bilateral talks without preconditions. What does that mean if the U.S. pulls away? Well, that means it's Ukraine and its European backers not trying to make a deal that the U.S. mediates, but make a deal directly with Russia. And so then how will the media present that dynamic to us? I would suggest that they will present that dynamic as Russia being unable and unwilling to come to terms on peace. And then eventually, once Russia starts using its leverage and influence, they will say that they are being attacked. And right there, you can see the way they will ride out the next few years. And I think we're going to be able to watch that and pay attention to it. Maybe that is why Donald Trump is playing this thing out so long. If he simply gets out and says we're over, or this is over, or whatever, Europe and it's the European backers, these globalists just keep on doing the same thing. Entirely possible. And I think we should keep a lookout for that. The governments that remain committed to the alliance will need to find the money and weapons to continue to arm Ukraine, whatever the U.S. decides to do. They will need to continue backing Kyiv in negotiations with both the U.S. and Russia, however those develop, leveraging the power of both of European sanctions and prospects for troop deployments. So we've been told that Russia wants to take over all of Europe, and now they are telling us directly that all of Europe needs to fight Russia if the U.S. isn't going to do it. They can't both be true. They want to do something terrible because the potential terrible thing they say is definitely going to happen, even though there's virtually no chance that it is going to happen. Countries that are in NATO but not the EU, including the UK, Turkey, Norway, and Canada, are playing key roles in countries traditionally outside the transatlantic security zone, such as South Korea, are also engaged. And I'm sure that that is very, very important. Let me see how many notes I have left here. Man, I was hoping that I could time it just right, but I have not done so. So let's continue just a little bit here and we'll see how quickly we can keep moving. Where are we? Where is my, all right, we got to go through this part. Yeah. So we're getting into Latin America now. Okay. Opinions on the White House appear divided as to whether cooperation on migration, and this is Mexico with the cartels and stuff, on migration and security with Mexico is more important than turning it into the non-consenting battleground for the next iteration of the U.S. war on terror. This one aimed at drug lords and their empires. So is it going to be that kind of battleground? They're putting the responsibility here on the U.S. and suggesting that Mexico's not going to want to take part in getting rid of these cartels, which will then be framed as the U.S. going to war against Mexico. And I'm sure that they will probably make hay with that. Undergirding these questions is uncertainty about just how ambitious the White House wants to be in seeking to reshape the hemispheric order. Some read into the administration's actions as a desire to pull the region into a sphere of influence in which the U.S. would have enormous and nearly exclusive political, military, and economic sway. A ready-made framework for U.S. hemispheric dominion can be found in the Monroe Doctrine, which for more than 200 years has held that no power from outside the region should meddle in its political affairs. Later additions to the doctrine enshrined the U.S. right to intervene directly in other American nations. And we have seen many hints over the years, at a bare minimum, that Trump is interested in returning to the Monroe Doctrine. And that's the heading of their next subsection here. Yet restoring this 19th century scheme may not be realistic. Oh, it may not be realistic. Though never wholly abandoned, observance of the doctrine has relaxed significantly since the Cold War. Oh, you mean when the United States shifted, when things shifted so that the United States would become the central power in the global regime, the Monroe Doctrine was removed. So it's been since that point. So the Monroe Doctrine is to keep foreign influence away from North America. And that was removed, or at least significantly relaxed, quote unquote, since the Cold War. I wonder what they could mean by that. China has become a leading trade partner of many South American states, while authoritarian states such as Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela have displayed capacity for survival, though resolutely opposed to U.S. influence. Well, which U.S.? Good twin, evil twin. Skipping down, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum, while mounting a principled defense of national sovereignty, has acceded to a host of U.S. demands on border security and extraditions of high-level criminals. And it might be worth going back at some point if you're like, Chris isn't doing an episode today, and I would like to listen to his show rather than the rest of the slop on the internet. Go back to the episodes where I covered the Mexican election and Claudia Sheinbaum. And the point you'll hear me making in those episodes is you can say she's a woman. You can say she's a socialist. You can say she's Jewish. She's married to a banker, all those things. All that matters is good twin, evil twin. Is she going along in the direction of decentralization and fragmentation towards sovereignty and nationalism? Or is she a servant of the global regime? And this is the global regime telling you that she's not a servant. They go on. The April re-election of Daniel Noboa in Ecuador, who stressed his proximity to the White House, could well mark the onset of a wave of victories by right-leaning pro-Trump candidates, promising variable mixtures of tough security policies, leaner states, conservative cultural values, and a fluid channel of communication with Washington. Already the hard right, seems well positioned to win in Chile, a result that might be followed by electoral success in 2026 in Colombia, Peru, and Brazil. And then they note, of course, that El Salvador has Bukele and Argentina has Javier Milei. So all of South America, the dominoes are falling slowly, but they are all falling, and they're all going in the same direction toward sovereignty, toward nationalism, toward the end of the top-down centralized control system. With occasional tactical exceptions, such as U.S. backing for Argentina's credit system from the International Monetary Fund, or Washington's readiness to forgo or postpone high tariffs on Latin American states, it is far from clear what, if anything, the U.S. is ready to offer the region in terms of broad economic aid, public investment, or support for needs that are not immediately material to the White House's denizens. And good. Shouldn't be anybody. And again, back from the beginning, I forgot to mention one thing when we were talking about how they were saying democratic choice is still involved, but it greatly benefits the incumbent party. Again, that's an admission that with real elections, because we have fake elections, but with real elections, no one would support the regime elements. That is a blatant admission of exactly that fact. It really is incredible. And they also mention, of course, state-led repression in Venezuela. We covered that at length on Wednesday's episode. And again, if you didn't get that episode, if you're not a paid subscriber on the Substack, you can see and hear that in a replay form on Sunday afternoon. Without doubt, the new administration's strategy of browbeating Latin American states to extract their acquiescence has so far achieved its narrow goals, while shunting other challenges to the side. So they're browbeating these nations, and it's working. Trump, the bully, again, it's not these nations just happen to align with Donald Trump. But taking the next step of revitalizing a Monroe-inspired sphere of influence would seem far more difficult so long as the U.S. is unwilling to invest substantial resources in the endeavor. Although the region is likely to shift to the right, its economies remain attached to multiple different trade and business partners. Weaker states may well adapt to the new diplomatic playbook by hedging, learning to please Washington without retreating from their other key alliances. Trumpian favorite Bukele, after all, is one of China's closest partners in Central America. Brazil's government, for its part, has made clear that it now looks to BRICS, the bloc of developing countries that includes China, India, and Russia, as the bulwark of the multilateral order. So Brazil, under Lula da Silva, the Brazilian Joe Biden, is still pursuing the same agenda. Isn't that amazing? We can talk about Brazilian, devolution, quote unquote, way back at the beginning of, what was it, 2022? I think it was January 2022 or something. Or no, it was actually the fall of 2021. I'm going to check myself one more time. I think it was the fall of 2022 and into January of 2023. Let me just see. When was the last Brazil election? Come on, machine. Hurry it up. We've got things to do here. It was held in 2022, October 2nd. So yes, they had their January 6th on January 8th. They even had their own QAnon shaman show up. The whole thing's a farce. It's all a farce. Okay. These are tells. This is how you know these things are farces. And we have to lend credence to those tells when we see them. How much do we have left here? I bet I can get through this in 10 minutes. Let's try. So now we're going to the Middle East. Man, am I really going to get through this in 10 minutes? Hold on. Got to find my spot. Messed it all up. MENA, looking for a signal in the noise. In early January, before Trump had been inaugurated, Witkoff strong-armed Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu into accepting a truce in Gaza. So Trump, not even president, was able to make a global regime proxy states leader who we're told has full control over Trump do what he wants. And it wasn't even Trump that did it. It was Witkoff, his negotiator. Amazing. How should one interpret the White House's abrupt about faces? And they're talking about the back and forth with Iran and the rest of it. Is it seeking compromise or confrontation in the region? It has been hard to tell the signal from the noise. So it sounds like the regime is just as confused as the television is. You know who's not confused? None of us. Or all of us. I think I messed up a double negative there. But by March, the picture had changed dramatically. Netanyahu visited the White House in February, emerging buoyed by Trump's outrageous speculation about removing Palestinians from Gaza while the U.S. develops a Riviera in the Middle East. Was he buoyed? I thought that was an embarrassment to Netanyahu. And also, of course, you remember Trump taking the upper hand when they shook hands. Netanyahu has gone and visited him at Mar-a-Lago, and he's visited him twice at the White House. So Netanyahu controls Trump, or is it the other way around? The Israeli premier heard this remark as an endorsement of his own plans to induce the Palestinians' forced migration, characterized euphemistically as voluntary emigration from the Strip. Now, how amazing is that? They are voluntarily leaving the Gaza Strip, and then all the war that has happened there, as I said a long time ago, is a construction project. Isn't that incredible? The global regime is confirming my crazy conspiracy theories that are actually not crazy. They're the only way that the thing could possibly be working, but there's no proof of them from the mainstream media, and therefore they remain crazy conspiracy theories. You can find that episode, February 5th, 2025, construction project, or at least one of the episodes where I've discussed this. I think I've discussed the construction project more times than that, but yeah, okay. It was beginning of February, sometimes in January. Yeah. I think January. I don't know. Anyhow, many times we've just discussed the construction project, and that's exactly what this seems to be. If they are emigrating because a Palestinian state has already been set up, and they're like, you know what? This is just going to be this thing. We're going to leave to this area, and all the deal is done, as it probably was years ago. This is exactly the sort of thing you'd be telling, or you'd be seeing them tell us. Oh, it's being called a voluntary emigration, but Trump's actually helping them remove all these people from their homes. Less than a month later, Israel reneged on its ceasefire commitments and restarted its bombardment of Gaza. Thus, not only has Trump seemed to condone ethnic cleansing, but he's also made the January ceasefire effort seem insincere, a gimmick to keep scenes of bloodshed from tainting his inauguration ceremony. If you say so. Ideological battles. Nor does either Trump or Witkoff appear to have a handle on the ideological battles raging within the administration about Middle East policy. Broadly speaking, these pit adherents of a traditional U.S. approach to the region against critics of it. In recent history, the Middle East has received disproportionate attention in U.S. foreign policy thinking due to its strategic location, its hydrocarbon riches on which the global economy still relies, though not for long. If Saudi gets a nuclear deal and Iran gets a nuclear deal and the rest of it, and I say deal, all this stuff's already set in stone, and the domestic political importance of ties with Israel. So it's changing the traditional approach. That's neocons, that's global regimes, that's global Zionism. Now we have a different approach. The costs of that outsized role have produced many skeptics in Washington, some of whom are represented in the Trump administration. Early personnel decisions, particularly at the Pentagon, suggested that the skeptics would have an important voice in policymaking. Their objections to establishment logic are rooted in a narrower understanding of vital U.S. interests and how to secure them, which critics have described as neo-isolationists. And again, it's just a movement away from the top-down control system. They contend that the traditionalists still carry a lot of weight. The traditionalist faction in the Trump administration also seems to reign supreme on Syria, where reluctance to engage with the country's new leaders in light of their jihadist past has produced a wait-and-see approach that could doom construction of a viable order after the fall of Bashar al-Assad. So they got the dictator Assad out of there, brought in a former ISIS terrorist, or is it Al-Qaeda terrorist? And it's just not working out as well as they thought. They're not going to deal with that guy. That guy was just being shown off by Emmanuel Macron as some sort of trophy the other day. All of it's ridiculous. But again, they're kind of telling us it's not going to work. Assad's going to be back. If it does not change course, and if Assad's going to be back, then did he ever leave? If it does not change course, the administration could help trigger a relapse into conflict that could endanger the country's minorities, boost Islamist militancy anew, and set off more uncontrolled migration out of Syria. And so they want that to happen, of course, because the global slave trade must continue. Can we do it? Maybe we can do it. A cloudy forecast. Things do not have to go this way. The U.S. could engage Syria's new authorities and de-escalate with the Houthis, though Trump seems to have forgotten about Gaza, and he has de-escalated with the Houthis. He's forgotten about Gaza, or so it seems, even as aid organizations run out of supplies and Palestinians near starvation amid Israel's blockade. The White House could decide to push for a lasting ceasefire in the Strip, which would have salutary knock-on effects on several other regional files. Regional actors also have a vote. If Israel keeps squeezing Gaza unchecked, or worse, tries to force Palestinians to leave the territory for Egypt, the administration is likely to find itself preoccupied with Middle East affairs, whether it wants to be or not. And that sounds like another idle threat. They go on. Trump has one trait, a preference for transactionalism over warfighting. That could be good news for the Middle East. His desire for a deal with Iran creates an opportunity for diplomacy that deserves support. Success in talks with Tehran would avert a potentially ruinous war and could boost diplomatic efforts elsewhere. The challenges to reaching a new agreement, particularly one that Trump can portray as better than the deal he scrapped during his first term, are formidable. They probably aren't. As the president himself said, failure would likely raise the risks of armed conflict, with Israel in particular eager to see bombs drop on Iranian nuclear sites. Good luck making that happen, you insane neocon warmongers. The multilateral system, less with less. So now they are really attempting to get their heads around all of this. What are we going to do now that we don't have any of this power or any of these resources? The Trump administration has done much to weaken the multilateral system in its first 100 days, but it has also highlighted how weak that system was in the first place. But we're told it's the only thing that can protect all these countries and the world order and all these vulnerable peoples and etc. But the system was already weak. It's like it's mostly a facade. It's just a show. It's just a projection of abstract power that does not exist in the real world. It's part of the construction of the false reality. They're admitting it. Yet if this U.S. rejection of the post-1945 international order has been striking, the failure of other nations to rush to that order's defense, including financially, is equally remarkable. Didn't they just tell us like 15 pages ago that all of these other countries were going to provide the backstop and stop Trump? These are the smart people, remember. These are the elites of the elites. A premier globalist think tank is contradicting itself within one document unless the reader exists in the false reality. Events also conspired to highlight the UN's usefulness. They're worried, by the way, about UN funding. The UN funding is going to collapse. They can't do anything for peacekeeping efforts, etc. It's kind of what I was referring to earlier. The Security Council became the locus of U.S. efforts to manage a nuclear crisis with North Korea. Come on. Maybe in the fake and illegitimate Biden term, maybe prior to Trump's term. It helped that Trump's choice for UN Ambassador Nikki Haley was welcomed by other delegations as a traditional Republican, someone who is hawkish and hyperprotective of Israel, but looking to work within rather than dismantle the system. So a neocon warmonger, a global regime stooge that they were happy to have there. And again, an example of someone around Trump in the first term who was not put there to be the best possible Trump-aligned servant of the American people that he could possibly find. It was a person put there for a role. So it's not that we don't trust Trump. It's that he does things for multiple reasons, and we can't immediately know which reason he's doing which activity for. So they retract. Not so today. The system has no clear champion. European powers have made it clear that, preoccupied with their own defense as Trump retrenches from Europe, they have little cash to spare for UN operations. China has telegraphed that it will not bail out multilateral bodies deserted by Washington. So if the US pulls out and China's not going to bail them out, well, what's going to happen to these multilateral bodies? Either they would collapse to nothing or they would just be gone. Non-US diplomats in New York and Geneva insist that they will fight for international law and cooperation as best they can, but it is not clear how far they can go. After the US quit talks on a pandemic accord in January, other UN members approved the deal, which should help them react to future plagues in a more joined up way. But many diplomats admit that their political masters back home are wary of taking positions at the UN that would risk bilateral relationships with Washington. The lack of a strong international response to the administration's behavior is also in part a reflection of many states' pre-existing frustrations with the multilateral system. UN members have been exasperated with the Security Council's failure to resolve the wars in Ukraine and Gaza, the latter a source of deep resentment toward the Biden administration, while questioning the UN's relevance to international economic development. So the Biden administration didn't get the job done. The Trump administration's own approach to the Security Council has been haphazard. In February, it shocked its European allies by contributing with Russia on a council resolution calling for peace in Ukraine, which made no reference to Kyiv's sovereignty. How about that? The regime might lose their proxy state completely. So diplomats are closely coordinating. US and Russia are closely coordinating in the UN Security Council when it comes to Syria, South Sudan, and Haiti. It's almost like the US and Russia matter more than these international organizations, and the US and China matter more than these international organizations, as we've been talking about for years. While the organization's operational contribution to development has long been in decline, it has remained a platform for rich and poor states to hash out common visions of aid, including the 2015 Sustainable Development Goals. Oh, that's so cute. Sustainable development. Chuck that out the window. The Biden administration negotiated a series of agreements at the UN that acknowledged the economic concerns of developing countries, notably unsustainable debt loads, and the need to reform the international financial system to address them. It was never clear that Washington would fulfill such pledges. The Trump administration has rendered this question moot, declaring that the U.S. is no longer committed to the SDGs and launching a raft of tariffs that are likely to hit poor and heavily indebted countries hard. International officials are at least mildly relieved that the U.S. remains engaged with the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. So they're mildly relieved that the U.S. hasn't totally cut off interactions with the World Bank and the IMF. They're saying that heavily indebted nations will be hit hard by all this. Well, what happens when heavily indebted nations are hit hard? They can't repay their debts. Who are their debts to? The global regime and its fiat central bankers who have controlled the world through the regime fiat currency, currently branded as the American dollar. Isn't that incredible? So the war is against the regime fiat bankers, and they're going to be the ones who are on the short end of the stick here. And we are so close to the end. Isn't that amazing? Just these sections left, then we are done. And I was right that it would take about an hour and a half when I said that the other day. So that's positive. And you guys have still been hanging in there in the chat in all places. In fact, more people are in Substack now. So that's quite cool. Thank you, everybody, very much. All right, let's bring this to a conclusion. Toward less with less. Though the administration's cuts to humanitarian aid directly affect fewer countries than its economic policies, they threaten to hollow out one part of the UN system that many diplomats felt was irreplaceable. This is the World Food Program and the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. It's incredible. I think that there was a Hunter Biden involvement with the World Food Program. That was a while ago. I haven't looked at that in a while, so don't quote me on that. As of 2024, the U.S. was covering almost half the costs of many major humanitarian efforts. The Trump administration has rejected this logic. So we were funding all of it. And now Trump's not going to do it. And I have to check with the machine because I can't leave that unknown about Hunter Biden and the World Food Program. And we'll check that in just a second. So Trump has rejected the U.S. covering half of the cost of all of these UN humanitarian efforts. Aid experts acknowledge that the UN has some bureaucratic fat to trim, but these reductions erode the UN's last remaining claims to global relevance. How about that? The critical central global governing body that has existed first as the League of Nations and then became the UN after the United Nations after World War II is no longer relevant globally. It's broke. It can't do any of the stuff. It can't even run its quote unquote peacekeeping missions because they don't have the proper military support for it. It's totally collapsing. But in the longer term, the problem is a political one as well. If a growing number of states simply do not believe that multilateral forums can help meet their security, economic, or humanitarian needs, they will either disengage from international institutions or use them merely as platforms for voicing grievances. Some diplomats speculate that the Trump administration, which is undertaking a comprehensive review of its multilateral commitments, could eventually pull the U.S. out of the UN altogether. And thus ends the report. So saith the International Crisis Group. That, my friends, is a cheat code for geopolitics as it stands right now, in my estimation. And I know you can go back to your normie truthers who tell you what's happening on Fox News, playing Match Online, and they will not have any thoughts about absolutely any of this because it's just headlines and playing Match Online. But, you know, to each his own. If that's what people still find entertaining, then congratulations. Good on you. I have checked the chat. I hope you guys all had a good time in there. And I hope that you all have, oh wait, brain strain again. $20, he says, just because. Also, Polymathanon. Wonderful show, Chris. Was looking forward to your review on this garbage. Well done, brother. And thank you very much, my friend. I really do appreciate it. I appreciate all of your consistent support. It's wonderful to see you guys coming back again and again and again. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. I think next week, I will have shows. I'll do a normal episode. Maybe I'll do a subscriber stream. I'm going to do one subscriber stream and one normal episode. And they're going to be the long ones like we've been doing. One on Tuesday, one on Friday. And I'll decide. You guys are welcome to give me feedback. Would you prefer a subscriber stream on Tuesday or Friday? I would say Tuesday because it's kind of closer in the lineup, and these Friday episodes usually feel pretty good doing them on Rumble, you know, with the full audience. But then the flip side is if I do a Tuesday subscriber stream and it doesn't come out till Sunday, that's a much larger gap. And I feel like maybe Friday would be smarter to just have that 2-day gap for when it replays for the general public. So I welcome your feedback in the chat, and I'll check it right now or in comments on Telegram or Truth Social or whatever. And with that, I will be back on Tuesday at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic. And Joe Biden was never president.
Well,
what?
You know who I am, don't you?
Well, you ain't Fiona Apple, and if you ain't Fiona Apple, I don't give a rat's ass.
What's wrong with being an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times? What do you think, Max?
Do you want to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times?
Yeah, I think I'd like to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times.
It's not true. It's more true than I would perhaps prefer.
Let you down. We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling. What?
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com, and for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the range.